Tonight, Tuesday, September 19th, 2017 at 6:02 p.m. First on the work session tonight is illuminated signs. Do you have anything you'd like to add from Maverick or?
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
We're gonna need some napkins up here. Like maybe a roll of paper towels or something on.
Hey, where there's a will, there's a way.
There goes the agenda. Yes, again, Russell Hughes with Maverick. So this, it's not just across the street to the residential, which the golf course is zoned residential. It's almost on all four sides of the building. For example, our monument sign, which is out on the front of the property, which faces north and south. The north side could actually be lit based on the fact that that isn't residential over there, but the south side can't be lit. So up until such time as commercial comes in down there. The property to the rear of our store, which is the fire station, because that is more of a public use, that is also zoned residential. So we would have the same situation there where we would not be able to have anything behind us. So looking at all those options, and we do know that commercial will be coming in those areas sometime in the future. we've reached out to our sign company, and similar to what we have to do on site today, which is we are going to have to dim our lights to 50% past, I think it is 11 o'clock. We have no problem. I've asked them, I said, hey, is there some way that we can actually dim our lights, those other lights? And they said, absolutely. So we can easily do that, and if we can tie it to some sort of lumens, you know, based on what we have for the entire property. As long as we don't go beyond, I wish I would have had, we had a really great exhibit that we prepared for a project that we're working on right now in the city of Harriman, where we had a gentleman that actually took a drone up and looked at what the spillover was from our site in comparison to some other sites, and it was pretty telling. I'll probably send that into staff to take a look at, and it would be something that you could look at as well.
Councilwoman Barch?
So I assume we're just going to be speaking just about signage right now versus all the others, right? So one of the thoughts that I had on the signage is that we've actually dealt with this a little bit in another area, and that was with Tractor Supply. And where we had it, where the internally illuminated wasn't possible, they actually did downlighting. It was shielded downlighting. So that would still give the commercial business the ability to light their signage without necessarily shining directly at the residences. And so maybe within a certain distance of a residence, then that's what we asked them to do. And then, of course, you know, the dimming and whatever else is necessary. But I think one of the differences for me, and they mentioned Costa Vida as well, one of the differences for me is Costa Vida is already in a very, very commercial area. Honestly, the street lights will probably be brighter, and certainly their parking lights will be brighter than their wall sign. Down here, however, it's a very different environment, and I realize that eventually there will be more commercial down here, but with the golf course, which has no lighting whatsoever, and with the housing around it, this is a much calmer, much dimmer area. And so I don't have a problem with, you know, like, I don't know if you'd want a sign facing to the west or toward the firehouse, if that's something you want to sign on that or not. The sign to the north is not a problem. Honestly, even the sign to the south, because there's going to be commercial in between. But the sign on the front, maybe we do, and this is a bigger distance again, so maybe it's not necessary, but maybe we look at more of the shielded downlighting instead of
If
the
we
internally
actually
illuminated.
looked at that, we talked about that with staff, but because of the code, we couldn't have our lighting above a certain height, and the sign actually went above that. So we would actually had to have turned our lights the other way to shine them up,
Which also doesn't work.
which doesn't work. So
Right.
we would have had to have gone above that to actually have it shine down, downward facing, I guess. And so that's where we were kind of perplexed.
I would be okay if you're talking about having lights above the sign, not counting that as part of signage height. Does that make?
And I don't know how it's written in our code. I think the lights have to be below a certain level, don't they, Dave?
It's 16 feet, I believe.
The lights itself. That was one of the things we did with Tractor Supplies. They had to bring those down.
Well, I don't have all the dimensions in front of me. I was
Yeah.
just saying, I think if lighting the signs is such as, you know, Councilwoman Barge is suggesting, I think we could make a code adjustment to.
Because I think one of the interesting things is it's to some extent the distance, right, to the housing, but it's also the environment that it's in. So and I'm not quite sure how to deal with that. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
I just, you know, I'm thinking about Tractor Supply and their downlighting, and I don't know that I'm convinced that there will be a material difference in the amount of light that's going to be seen.
It's the directionality of the light.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have floodlights inside of your Maverick sign. It's
No,
a dim,
It's a
diffuse
dim
light.
red.
So-
It's red. It's not a
and
white light.
And the red doesn't work in
Helps.
your favor because you can see it forever.
Well, but it's not painful
But it's
to
not
the
painful
eyes.
to the eyes. Yeah.
Right, it's
Right.
different.
So it helps and it hurts. I mean, that's why tail lights are red, is you can see them from 15 miles away.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm just, you know, but I don't know if the amount of light that's being seen from, I get the directionality being an issue, but I just don't, I'm struggling to see whether we're just, you know,
And
You're just
maybe-
in the dark on this issue.
And maybe the
Very
lumens
good.
is the key to this, because for example, the Neater's sign is not offensive in any way, and it really doesn't travel past, meaning their monument sign, right? It doesn't really
Right.
travel, or even their lights on their building, it doesn't travel past the building. That might be some good information.
yeah. As far as the monument sign lighting it to the south, I agree. I mean, we've done it, we being the council, I wasn't actually on the council when it was done, but with Taco Bell and Wendy's, because we knew commercial was going in behind there, they were allowed to have signs in that direction. And so I don't necessarily see a problem with allowing that, where you're not abutting the residential zone, there's commercial in between you and them, so. And then, is the firehouse actually zoned residential, or is it zoned institutional civic?
I believe it's residential.
Seems, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I get that, maybe it needs to be institutional civic, and then we don't have this issue, so. But,
And honestly, I don't know, I know that there's been discussions that the golf course is kind of bermed in that area, so I don't know if what the line of sight is as well.
right.
Where those homes may be a lot lower than, and they may not even have that sight.
I mean, I'm not picturing necessarily a Maverick, but just a general gas station. You've got all the downlights under the
The canopy.
canopy around the pumps, and you've got, you know, all this other site lighting that I don't know that you're even gonna notice a Maverick sign amongst all that. You know, I think that the environment is gonna be changed enough by you being there that the sign isn't necessarily gonna be the one thing that people are gonna be like, oh, you know what, that red Maverick sign is, you know, the problem. It's just gonna be like, well, it's lighter than it used to be because now there's a commercial development there.
Right.
So I don't know. I can see the downlighting maybe in being like the go-to for when we're changing the code, but at a certain point, you know, 500 feet or something like that, I think allowing them to better answer, because I mean, now we're having to change code that may have unintended consequences in other areas where people are like, well, you let Maverick put lights at 20 feet, we want our lights at 20 feet.
Well, and then maybe it also has to do with, because environment's hard to define, but for example, not just arterial, but like arterial 5 lanes or more, something like that, you know,
Right.
where it's, so for example, up Northern Redwood Road, where it's already very well illuminated, is a huge difference to lower Redwood Road, where you've got 2 lanes. And it won't be soon, but.
Well,
Be soon.
I mean, eventually this is probably going to be the same. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what UDOT's plans for lighting the road are with the widening, but. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, in that case, up here, I especially think, like, I don't think that they'd even notice. I think that, you know, because there's so much other light just from the UDOT's lights lighting Redwood, I don't even know you're going to notice. Yeah. Well, and Costa Vita's not 24 hours like you guys are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark?
If I could point out, the lights along Redwood Road, some are UDOT lights, but most of them, I think, are arterial lights for the city. So the lighting that you're seeing, especially on the city poles, is pretty much the lighting you would expect. So if you go in front of Legacy Farms right now, you'll see that the LED lights are casting pretty much that light. And so that might be something you'll want to consider as well, because those same light standards, you'll be installing them on the front of their building. And ultimately, it will extend the whole length of the property, will ultimately replace other lights in the neighborhoods and stuff. But for now, the standard would be those LED arterial lights And so whatever light we have in front of Legacy Farms is a good example of what that will be, and that is pretty bright.
Yeah.
And you know, I know Maverick, you'll be a good steward of whatever we do, but in all fairness, thinking about it, not every sign that's going to come in is going to be red, and I don't know that we
Yeah.
necessarily want to regulate, and I don't know that we can, around what colors you can use.
We've already done it once.
Well,
Yes, I see your point.
Well, I stand corrected. I prefer not, but
And I think that's where we went back and thought about just going to something that we could dim.
Yeah,
So
and
that it
I
doesn't
think that's,
that-
I mean, for me, that's the answer is, I mean, if you're dimming and the amount of foot candles coming off your property is not appreciably different than what it's going to be with just the road and the canopy lighting, then,
Right. Will be significantly less.
yeah. So, I mean, I guess I see that as the easiest and probably adequate solution. But there probably should be a distance rating because where this is appropriate with 880 feet, it's probably not appropriate with 100 feet.
Right.
So-
And I know that there are other pockets up and down Redwood where you see that, and I think that's when I started looking at it, I go, this isn't going to be the only location that's going to have this. You're going to have this in other
So you
areas.
can come up with a solution that will work everywhere rather than just for your specific site.
Right.
Do you have another Maverick that you've done this with in a similar setting that we could go out and see the lights dim or visually?
I have that study with me right now. I just thought about it. I do have my computer, and I do have the lighting from that. I could actually probably send it to somebody and have them pull it up.
That would be great, so we can visually
Yeah,
see.
that's all. Foot candles doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Lumens, it's,
Yeah.
when I can see it, I know what I'm dealing with. Right? I know it's a term, but, right, right, I just don't know the difference. In real terms, what the difference between 1 and 10 is.
will you explain to us foot candles?
So
Mark?
if you're looking to try and have that study pulled up, like this second, that might be a challenge. Do we want to?
So this is the
Put
photo
pause
you've
on
got, the aerial showing the light difference.
What's
Is that what you're pulling up as
Yeah,
the photo?
that's what I'm going to pull up.
Okay. Ryan,
Just, while you're doing that, do you want the sign facing up toward west, up to into the?
I'm trying to think
Toward
of
the
what
fire?
I think that what we have is we just have a small Maverick sign on the back. I don't have the,
I mean, would it kill you to turn that off at night, or not even have it lit?
let me take a
I
look
just
and see what.
that one I don't see gaining you a whole lot of business. Yeah.
Where'd it go?
And not only that, but if I'm not mistaken, our code, we have to actually approve the fourth sign still. Is that correct?
Fourth
I
side.
think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So choose
So
your
maybe,
side.
yeah, maybe that's the one you want to get rid of.
Ryan, do you have anything?
I was just going to add, as a possible calculation for the distance of the signs. So in code 1918-6 I, or that's double I as an example, but in E, you talk about a formula that you use there for calculating the lumens and based off the size of the sign, the square footage of the sign. And so I was just kind of doing, based off of the two calculations we have there, if you just had a simple, as a suggestion, doubling that measurement for, as far as allowing signs that are across from residential. Because that would then solve the issue of it being too close. Because, I mean, if we said 100 feet was okay, but then they have a 200 square foot sign, then that would light up the whole neighborhood. But based off the calculation, the bigger the sign, more distance they'd have to have across from the residential. There.
Sorry, I think I misheard that.
I think I got it, but say it one more time.
Okay, so in that section E, they use examples of based on the sign square footage, they times it by 100, and that's so forth. Yeah, square root of that, and that gives them their measurement of distance. And so if they doubled that formula, as far as for distance, referring to residential areas. They're across from the. That way, it's still based off of a similar formula based on the size of the sign. You don't have to say minimum 100 feet, but then also they have a 200 square foot sign.
Can use that to calculate how far away from residential.
Bigger the sign, farther away.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's the Traverse Mountain sign, 3 counties, right?
Yes, they've got to be at least Pelican Bay to the sign away.
Makes sense to me.
Perfect.
No Wi-Fi.
Okay, no. We appreciate you. If you would send that so staff can get after
Yeah, I
us,
will.
that'd be great.
For sure.
Okay. Next section, illuminated signs or signage. Code. Title 19.
Okay, this is actually a work session for the public hearing that's later on the agenda, but thought it would be easier to discuss it in a work session format first. So there are several changes being made or proposed. There's changes to definitions, and regional parks are included. They were missed last time, so that definition is included in this round. And then there's some changes to some of the other definitions, one of them to public utility sites and one to public buildings. And one of the things that we're discussing in this round of code amendments is cell towers, and then the other thing we're discussing in this round is public utility sites and public building sites and what those standards should be. There's quite a few changes proposed for the cell tower section of the code. And so one of the questions is camouflaging or stealth design better. We have a requirement in there that requires camouflaging or stealth so that it's meant to blend in or be less obvious or things like that. And then I have some images here for reference that's to allow you to discuss that further. And as it went through the planning commission, they struck part of that required camouflaging in a park. And that's obviously up for further discussion by the city council.
Sarah, since you've got that picture up there, is that what's considered the solid shield, whatever it is, cell tower that it was talking about?
Right.
Why would you want to allow for a 6-foot radius, 12-foot diameter with that versus 4-foot and 8-foot for the regular cell towers? What's the purpose?
For them to have the shield around it, they need that bigger size. So if we like this design and prefer that over the other, then it would need more room.
And so literally it's just a covering basically over the rest of the cell tower,
Over the antenna,
over the antenna itself, the antennas itself?
right?
That's, okay. So it takes an extra 2 feet to put the shielding over it?
Right.
It's a big shield, okay.
So height, the current version of the code is regulated by zone, and for each zone the height is listed. The changes that are proposed is that it would be regulated by property size. So if it's up to 1 acre, you would defer to the maximum height in the zone. If it's 1 to 5 acres, it would be 80 feet. It could be up to 80 feet tall, and then it's 5 acres or more, it could be 100 feet, up to 100 feet. So that is proposed in the draft. And then as far as location goes, it's allowed in non-residential and residential, but that's also dependent on the size of the property. So it would be allowed on lots that are 1 acre or more. If it's less than 1 acre, it defaults to the height of the zone. So if it's 1 acre or more, it can be, oh, sorry. Might be contradicting myself with the earlier stuff in this one. So the top stuff is correct. Anyhow, in the residential zones, it's proposed to be allowed at schools or park sites that are 5 acres or more, and at public building or public utility sites, and as indicated by lot size. So if it's 1 to 5 acres, 80 feet, or 5 or more acres, 100 feet. And then it can be adjacent to transmission lines, and can be 100 feet. And then If that's the situation, then the spacing requirement that's listed later on wouldn't apply if it's next to the power lines, but any other location, they would need to be at 1,000 feet apart minimum. And then as far as setbacks go, they would have to meet the underlying zone. So if it's a commercial zone, a 50-foot, or we've changed that, a 20-foot front setback, and then it would also need to be 200 feet from existing and future residential. And then the antenna, it's proposed that they can be 4 feet from the pole, but if a shield design is proposed, that they can be 6 feet from the pole. And then there are some architecture requirements listed in there, that it be a masonry building with a pitched roof, and that's to avoid just really generic plain buildings, and fencing, no chain link. So here, here's an example of one we have in the city, and then here's an example of stealth design, or what's termed stealth design or camouflage design. Obviously, if you're putting that next to a bunch of trees that aren't 100 feet tall, you know, so the question is, does that make it more noticeable by requiring stealth design? And then here's some other options. So this is also one that's in our city. This particular one is, there's a bunch of antenna on a silo in Lehigh. It's quite a large silo. And then here's some other examples I found on the web of architecturally designed structures for the antenna or cell towers. And then this was just a web image of.
Where is that one with the eyeball?
What's that?
The one with the
But is
glasses.
that a lagoon ride? What is that with the glasses?
Right? That's a cell tower, and all of those are antennae. So.
Yeah.
So there's
awesome.
quite a few options out there. I think the main topic is, does stealth or camouflaging help, or does it make it more obvious? And then, sure. And so here's some other options: a tall flagpole, tall tree, palm trees, etc. I really thought we could use some palm trees around here, so. There is a representative from Sprint here that's been talking to the city on and off for a couple of months about where they could possibly locate or poles within the city. This is the south part of the city. The dots that you're seeing are 2 school sites, and then this is the difference in propagation versus 35 feet, which the current code allows, and then 100 feet, which the draft code allows. And then we could also, there's also some tank or some water pond sites in the south part of the city that could potentially work for this applicant as well. We'd have to look at that further. This is a map that AT&T supplied to us. This is an area of congestion. So AT&T is not here tonight, and they have an application later on the agenda that's recommended denial because it doesn't meet, recommended for denial because it doesn't meet the draft code. However, they could put it in a nearby location and meet the draft code if they chose to continue working with us on a
It doesn't actually meet
proposed
draft
site.
code nor current code, right?
Right. Does not meet current code or the draft. So when we first drafted it, it met the draft, and we were processing it as it went through Planning Commission, and after the changes that were made, it didn't meet the draft code either. However, there are nearby locations that could be considered for a 100-foot pole if they wanted to continue discussing a location in the north.
Just so the area of congestion, is that they're looking to place something in this green zone?
They need more antenna in this area to handle the congestion. So less dropped calls, things like that. Okay, so then on to public building and public utility buildings or facilities. This came up. We have ponds coming through. We have sewer pump houses. We have sites already that don't meet the minimum lot size. So, in a sense, we've been doing this. We have a few lots throughout the city where we have public utility buildings, something like a lift station or things like that. And we've created these lots without applying the minimum lot size, just because that's what made sense as we process these. However, we want to proceed with codifying these and try to address a lot of possibilities in a lot of different situations.
Sarah, can we break it up a little bit and talk about cell phone tower and then talk about the fencing and the landscaping?
Sure, yeah, it's a lot, so let's do
So if we can go back to cell phone towers, I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts and comments, and so we're not getting different parts confused.
Well, I think it's a necessary evil. I think Verizon has the market for sure as far as coverage. But you know, as the city grows, we're going to need a lot more. We're going to see congestion, like AT&T has seen in that area. So it has to be allowed for, in my opinion. As far as like the different types of cell towers, it's a bag there. You know, of course, like whenever it's available to on a school or that effect, I think that'd be my preference. Having a 100-foot pole. There, so in those studies, I mean, is there anything that's showing along kind of west side of Foothill coverage?
I think I mean, we can get answers for that, but I wonder also, I mean, a lot of this is not so much about their coverage, it's about what we want as a city as far as our standards, and then they'll find out where it can go to meet their coverage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it does. Because, I mean, well, and that's why I was mentioning that, just because, you know, 100 foot is clearly, they get the most coverage there. And so if it's further out of kind of the, better. Yeah. Well, yeah, except for those people who moved back. Yeah, so, I mean, it's, the question is, I mean, do we want tons of smaller cell towers? Or I'd like to hear what.
Councilman Porter?
I have actually seen the palm tree ones. I'm from California, so they actually have those down there. They're not quite, well, not in Northern California. That's probably true. They actually fit in a little bit better than the pine tree ones, I think. But anyway, I think camouflaging. I think it really depends on the site, and you know, most of those usually the camouflage them as trees, and most of the time they're surrounded by, you know, and if you look in the pictures, they're all surrounded by forests and
Sagebrush.
which we don't necessarily, you know, I guess if they have a 100-foot tall sagebrush, that Russian olive, you know, that might do it, but you know, I don't know. I guess if we can leave it as an option, you know, if we feel like it's necessary or something, jury's still out on that one, I guess. As far as the height, I agree. I think that allowing for the 100-foot, I mean, just looking at that map, you can see we would need a lot fewer towers. And I think, you know, having one big tall tower is preferable to having 4 or 5 small towers scattered about. Then the location, I like kind of where you're going with that. I had a couple questions just looking at the code that was in our packet. I'm trying to find what section I'm in. Section 3, J, under the setbacks. In subsection 2, when located in a residential zone or a non-residential lot that is adjacent to residential zones, development, or property, blah, 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 blah. Monopoles should be a minimum of 200 feet from the property line abutting residential uses. This will allow for adequate separation from residential development and an adequate fall zone. Well, I guess it's arguable if it allows for adequate separation from residential development. I struggle to see why a 100-foot pole needs a 200-foot fall zone. Yeah, I mean, this is jumping cactus or jumping monopoles, I guess. But you know, either we need to remove that as a reason because I think it doesn't make any sense, and just leave it as adequate separation from residential development, or we need to reduce that down so that it
Is there a
actually is
reason
a fall
you
zone.
went to 200 on that?
Well, it was originally proposed as 120 feet, so just beyond the length of the tower. The Planning Commission felt that 200 feet would be more adequate, and they were concerned that there have been some instances where these have caught fire, so they wanted it for additional protection. And that the situations we found where they had caught fire were related to construction, not because they spontaneously combust or anything like that.
Well, that's good to know.
But if I'm not mistaken, that happens like that maintenance, kind of maintenance where they're going up and replacing different antenna parts or adding different antenna parts. That actually happens, the maintenance, not the fires, but the maintenance actually happens fairly often.
I don't know the answer to how often it happens, but I do know that the fires that we researched were related to construction, adding or removing or replacing antennae
okay.
and catching things on fire while they were welding.
And the poles fell over and traveled 100 feet. I think 200 may be excessive.
I think if you want to propose something different, then I think you would just ask the rest of the council to weigh in on that so that we can get general feedback.
If we're I don't know that I'm okay with 200, but if we're gonna leave it at 200, we need to get rid of this fall zone. I'm okay with the 125 that was originally proposed, but I'm just one of 4 today.
Okay, I will highlight that for further discussion.
And then the next section K for spacing, no monopole shall be approved within 1,000 feet of another monopole. Where did that number come from?
It's just a general standard that I found in other codes.
Okay. I guess I can, if it's typical for this kind of thing, then I guess I can live with it. So. Those were my 2 specific questions. As far as talking about the other, I guess to the rest of the council, I think that, maybe for the 100-foot poles being 1,000 feet apart makes sense, but, we're also allowing shorter poles and maybe they can be closer together. I don't know. But I guess my real question is I'm looking at my notes here, so I'm kind of, this makes sense in like a residential or near residential zoning, but like, wouldn't we want them kind of clustered in commercial areas so that they're not intruding into residential?
I think we want them clustered in that we ask them to put the items on the same poles where
Right.
possible. I don't know if we want lots of poles together.
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
The 100-foot poles allow for like 3 layers of them, right? Wasn't that the discussion we had last time?
Right, they could fit 3 to 4 different users or different layers of antenna on a 100-foot pole.
But of course, those who are on the lower layers would then want them more often because they're only going to be a 35-foot or 40-foot or whatever it is, not the
Right.
100-foot, right?
Whoever's on
Or
the top
they're-
has got
right.
the most coverage. All right, well, I'll wait to see if anybody else has questions about that. They may not.
Councilwoman Barch?
So my first question is,
No, it would still meet the city standard, and then it would be a single antenna on top of it.
they're not going to go up 100 foot.
They're not building a tower.
No, yeah, they can only go, 15 feet above the height of the existing pole, but the light itself would go back in the same place.
I'm not on, sorry. I didn't have my microphone on. Just that we've had this problem with our sports complex where the light was such that we had to go back in and change our code, or maybe we'll fix that so we don't have to change it or revamp it again. But nonetheless, if we're going to go in and all of a sudden now we're going to have lights taller than they should be again. So are we going to have to change our code again? That seems rather silly to me. And I have, well, no, but it's not that. It's the height of the structure. We've actually got it in there, the height of the structure. So if we add an additional 15 feet on top of our light structures, that's going to increase the height again.
Yeah, and I apologize. I want to keep with your thought, but Jeremy has an item for a little bit Is that next council meeting, the grant? So we're going to be coming to you at our next council meeting where we've received a grant to do our fixed network for our water read system. And one of the things that we're talking about is the possibility of using those light poles to put our fixed radio read antenna on. So that really is more kind of what we're contemplating is the ability, rather than go and put a new monopole in, for us to be able to put radio read technology on our light. We already have a power source, we're already maintaining it, and for us to be able to put those strategically throughout the city to make sure that we've got adequate radio read coverage for our radio system. So although it's specific to cell tower and in this particular context, we're also looking at that for other technologies as well.
So I guess my question is are we going to mess up our code again where we already have a height limit on our lights and all of a sudden we're adding 15 feet? That technically then will increase the height of our lights and we'll have to change our code again. And then you'll get higher lights and then the one put antenna on it. So, I mean, how does it stop? Where does this stop?
You could certainly write it in right now, so whatever the direction is on this in your legislative discretion, we can write that in here and say something like, the additional 15 feet shall not be included as part of the overall height limit of the light pole or whatever.
Right. I mean,
Pole.
the way I see it is
Signal.
the antenna is not part of the pole. It's an antenna. It's being put on top of the pole. So I mean, it's it's kind of like saying,
Mark, really what I think is there's a concern. Jeremy's coming back with something in 2 weeks.
that we need to
Can you-
adjust this for.
Not code, but could you tweak the code to fit
Fit.
that with legal and, so we're not
Already
trying to,
fits it, right?
that portion?
You think it
Right.
fits already? You don't think that's a concern to have something taller than our maximum already as
So
part of the
what-
structure?
Sorry, the reason a pole would need to be replaced is so it would be stronger, so that it could handle the antenna. So that's the reason a pole would be replaced. What we're saying is, if you need to replace the pole so that it's stronger, the light fixture goes exactly at the same height it was when you took the pole down. So that's what it means by the light fixture shall be placed at the original height. So you can go, so along our arterials, the max height is 24 feet, and so you can go 10 feet above that. If you need to replace the pole to have a stronger pole to handle the antenna, then your light fixture goes at the same height. You don't go on top of the,
But the light still has to meet our standards, has to look like our
Right.
lights, everything else.
right?
Have a rabbit ear poking out the
What
top.
I've seen some model ordinances for these small cell phone structures that are attached to existing light poles and what have you, street lights and traffic signals, and it really fleshes out the details a lot more than this does. This may not be adequate long term. We may want to have you pass this subject to any modifications, and then we can further refine it. But there
Not passing
are
it.
model ordinances that are much more
19.
specific than this, and honestly, this is a good option because it gives the telecommunication providers an opportunity to do something where they're not proliferating all these
Poles.
cell phone towers everywhere.
Right.
Okay.
It's kind of going in the line of the co-location.
Okay, along those lines, so we talked a little bit about distance. Councilman Porter specifically talked about distance. Excuse me. So 1,000 feet actually is fairly close together. We technically could get a 100-foot tall monopole at Crossroads Boulevard at, what's the road called, Lawson, behind us? Commerce Drive, and at Commerce Drive next to Neaters and all of that up there. I mean, you could literally have the entire, 1,000 feet's not very far in reality for those big poles. So I certainly don't want to see any less than that for those big poles. Perhaps even a further distance, I'm not sure. And then also along those lines, along the street, so if they're on the street lights, my understanding is 250 feet. They can have one every 250 feet.
Right.
So we're going to look like we're growing grass or old man eyebrows or something all over our street lights if wear a tinfoil hat. It just seems really close together to me. So I don't know if we really, I mean, maybe I'm one of, the only one that thinks that, but it just seems like a lot of antennas sticking up everywhere.
Well, these aren't like,
Right now, there's.
This is a
These aren't the
singular
monopoles.
antenna, so it's not,
Yeah.
it's not wrapping, it's not wrapping or.
it's just one thing kind of poking off the side of a pole.
Like a little whip antenna, like miniature whip antenna of some kind?
Well, it's like one of those antennas.
One of those little rectangle things.
I'll do a quick search, so
Okay.
I'll see if I can find.
I guess,
the image.
and that's one of the things is we don't have a lot of images to show
Right.
what this is gonna be, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. I'll keep going while you're looking for that. So then a couple other comments that I had, with the utility corridor, if we are along the power line corridor, I guess I don't understand why, if we've got a power line corridor already, we wouldn't include the monopole or make them put it on one of the power line poles, instead of saying that they have to have it within 120 feet. That just seems like you're extending the power line corridor instead of combining, which is what we're trying to do.
Right.
So I would much rather see along the power line corridor that they either put it on the power poles or that they have it within the power line corridor instead of expanding that area.
Oh, and the reason they can't do that is because the power lines interfere with the antenna. So they actually, and the cell phone company doesn't allow them within a certain distance.
Okay, so why would we say that we would want it within the 120 feet then? That seems backward.
That's
If-
what I'm saying, is that it can be, within 120 feet of the power line corridor.
They don't want to be.
So we're trying to give them adequate room. If we put them closer than that to the power line corridor, the power company won't approve it.
So then really it should say the monopole shall be located no closer than 120 feet to the power line corridor.
No, we're saying within 120 feet of it, so that they're.
But within 120 feet of it includes the power line corridor. If you say within 120 feet, it includes the power line corridor. It can be 120 feet up, from the power line corridor up to 120 feet. That's just an English thing. I mean, that's,
I agree. You're right.
The way I read it is.
Where is it? Sorry.
it's on D. It's on,
Okay.
sorry, no, D within.
Oh, it's also in D.
It's
Yeah,
in D also.
Is it?
It's in a couple
It's
places.
in
K?
It's in ID and it's in,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Item K have to be farther in the house. Unless they're certain 20 foot.
That's how I read it.
Is it because monopoles will blend?
Yeah, you want
What,
to say.
so, what's the objective of that section?
So, what we're saying is there's a 1,000 foot spacing, but if they're near a transmission power line corridor, that they're not as obvious, so they can be closer than 1,000 feet to each other.
Okay, so worst case scenario, power line corridor, you go at 120 feet from the power line corridor, and now all of a sudden you can have monopole, 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 because there's now not,
Right, in
A
this
minimum.
situation, you could sort of have a monopole farm, if you want to call that, or a conglomeration of monopoles, because there's not a spacing distance in that situation.
that seems like a bad idea. To have, I don't know.
We probably should put some guidance,
Or some sort of minimum, I think.
no closer than.
leave
the
call it
power
1,000.
poles,
Right.
Whatever the power poles are there. That makes sense.
Yeah, again, we just need to rework all the wording anyway, because it's, yeah. And then my last question, I think it's my last question on this stuff, well, kind of, sorry. J in setbacks, the double I. So right now it says that when located in a residential zone or a non-residential lot that is adjacent to residential zones, it's 200 feet from the property line abutting the residential uses. So when we're talking about that, how exactly does that work with the PC zone?
It's not addressed.
Okay. And so just a thought, for example, if apartments, because we should have higher density housing in that really more urban area eventually, if apartments wanted to go in next to the hospital can't put a cell tower pole up
Right.
because it's next, which is silly.
Well, they would have to be 200 feet from it. So the hospital could, if their property's wider than 200 feet and meets all the setbacks and things like that.
Yeah.
So if they're a 5-acre site, or a 1 to 5 acre site, they could have an 80-foot pole. But 5-acre site, then they could, and based on the size of that site, they should be able to meet the 200-foot setback from residential.
Okay. I think there's just still some things we haven't thought about on this, so. I already asked about the shielded versus non-shielded. Is there a preference to use shielded versus non-shielded cell towers for those that aren't camouflaged?
No, it was just out of the different things that were online, it was just a look that was more appealing than some of the others without being totally,
Is the shielding totally
Overload.
aesthetic? There's no other?
it's just
okay.
aesthetic.
Okay. On N, in little I, it says that cell tower equipment is exempt from 1916. I'm not positive, but later on in the code changes for 1915, it refers back to this, so I'm wondering if that's supposed to be 1915 and not 1916, unless it's referring to something else besides the design guidelines for the building.
This is referring to the site and architectural design requirements.
Okay, so when we get down below, I thought that that was in 1915 within the staff packet, so I could be looking at it wrong. I just wanted to make sure we've got the right,
Yeah, we should make sure that that's the right reference.
right code reference. Yeah, and then also in triple I, so building, housing, cell tower equipment shall include a minimum of 412 gabled pitched roof. The roof shall not be asphalt shingles, but it doesn't say what it shall be, so can it have a shake roof? Because that seems not good. Is it supposed to be standing seam metal roof like is mentioned later on? So we just need clarification there again. And then my last question is in V or 5. What is a lattice tower?
A lattice tower, it kind of looks like a three-sided ladder.
Got it. So what if we wanted to make it look like a water tower and then it had those cross supports? Does that count as a lattice tower, or is it strictly an actual cell phone tower that looks like that? It's a camo tower? That one's okay? Just
So
curious.
these are examples of lattice towers.
Okay. Of course, along the power line corridor, that might be camouflaged. Just a thought. Sorry. I mean, really, right? So.
As long as it's not a cabbage tower.
A cabbage tower? That's disgusting. So those are my thoughts. But my big concerns then, of course, are just, again, the utility easement the power line corridor and the height on top of our poles. So if we take care of those, then.
Okay, Councilman Wilden?
I'll just try to hit kind of the things that sound like they're up in the air a little bit. 200-foot buffer, I'm fine with that. I like having a larger buffer, just frankly 100 foot or 120 is awful close to potentially someone's backyard. And I'm fine with striking, there we go, the language that Porter is vehemently opposed to. The camouflage, I like the suggestion as, can be used as determined, appropriate or whatever language that fits, not capricious or whatever, for that area. Because like the ones with the flag, I think in certain places that'd be pretty.
Or the ones that look like art pieces, or, yeah, I mean, there are lots of times when it would work.
Yeah, a
And
lot
so
of
the
pretty
planning commission struck that.
Howard.
They just struck the part in the park, making it where it had to be big
So
trees.
there's I'll go up to it.
Because it was required in the parks, right? And they got rid
Right,
of the requirement.
Oh, it's just gotten rid of the requirement. So I like allowing it
Right here.
at the discretion.
But whose discretion, I guess, is my question.
City council, well, I don't know.
Because I don't know if they cost different, but I'm guessing Verizon is going to always opt to not camouflage their towers.
And it definitely needs to be the landowner, whoever the landowner is.
No, that
But I
makes
think
sense
that,
to me.
I think that there should be some guidelines that the city council or planning commission or whoever it is that's gonna make that final decision has to make those decisions so that it's not completely
Yep.
subjective.
Yeah, and I don't know what that would look like. All that right now. Can't write code on the fly, really. At least for that. But I apologize, my notes got out of order. What are some other things that were up in there? Was it 1,000, wrote down 1,000 foot?
1,000 feet between poles, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And then we talked about, what was it, the 250 on light poles, was it? You know, whatever we want to do there. I mean, there's not a huge request right now, so if there isn't a lot of requests, I'd say just keep it consistent with the other one, and then if there becomes a need, the carriers come to that, then we can decrease the distance. It's not.
Do we have guidelines by with which we can, I don't want to say force, but heavily encourage the combining of towers?
Yeah, it's in here.
And then, the other thing that we were talking about is if it's within the power line corridor, I think having some verbiage that it shouldn't be, if it's within the 120 feet, that it needs to equate the same distance as the power poles, so it can blend in there. Was there anything else that we were?
Councilman Wilt, can I just get a clarification on what you said? So you're talking about the lights, or excuse me, the antenna on light poles?
Yes.
You wanted to keep it at 1,000?
Spacing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and just to explain, I had Sarah put in that 250 because in my previous experience, I worked with a couple of cell companies that did put towers, almost one right after another at a high school. And I measured the distance, and there the lights on the football field. And so I just measured the distance to see what that exactly was. It was about 250 feet. So that's why I had Sarah put that in.
Oh, and I'm not being critical of that choice.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to start somewhere for a discussion. So
Well, and I don't think you were against the 250, right? You said it's
No,
to
I'm
start. It's
not-
okay to start
I'm
with,
not
is what he
against
said.
250. I'm just working to find maybe solutions so we can.
The consistent 1,000 foot.
And 250 isn't a bad suggestion. I was just, if there's concerns with that and there's not like tons of applications coming in for that specific thing, would the 250 versus 1,000 impact water meter readers? That's not the right word, but yep.
Across the entire city?
So you won't need one every 250.
How far apart are the light standards at the sports complex? I mean, if they're putting them on high school football lights, I mean, that might be something that we could double up on those. Well, no, on those ones, they just put them on the side of the.
Well, in any case, if it's not going to impact the fixed network and whatever, 250,000, I think either works. It's just whatever everyone else is coming. I don't think if we go with 1,000, it'd create any unintended consequences. Could potentially with the 2. I'm looking at it. Was there anything else that I didn't touch? All right. I don't know what I think about it. I agree with you. I don't mean to be facetious, like whatever.
And I was being facetious in the fact that I thought it was kind of funny that you could have a shake shingle, but not an asphalt shingle by the way the code was written. It was just kind of, it's just one of those things we kind of missed is all.
So why would we prohibit asphalt shingle?
The planning commission added that because of the potential for fires, and they didn't want a roof that would catch on fire.
Well, we have a big enough buffer.
I think maybe just a clarification to change it to standing seam metal roofing, just like later or something like that, but. I mean, technically, you could put grass and water in it, and it also wouldn't be combustible, so.
So, Sarah, I apologize. I missed that conversation with Planning Commission. If, with the buffer that we've got, is the asphalt prohibition necessary?
Do we care if they burn their own building down, is what you're saying?
That's my point.
It doesn't have to be there. That's what I'm here for, to get your feedback.
I just think that requiring a standing seam metal roof, I mean, that is really an expensive solution. I think they're going to be insured. They're responsible for it. It's their property. You know, asphalt, we have asphalt shingles all over the rest of the city. This would, I think, be the only exclusion of that material.
I like where
We have
Mark's
a
at.
200-foot buffer. I'm fine with having I mean, we
They
put
wanna
a
break
big
out.
buffer just
They
for
do
this.
blow off more frequently in the wind than a standing seam metal roof does, unless we get a tornado, but.
Again, that's the property owner's problem, not ours.
So I'm fine if you pull it out.
So the pitched roof, but don't worry about what it's made of.
Everybody agrees? Okay.
So this is coming up for a vote later on in the council. Is that right?
It is, it is. It's the first public hearing, the only public hearing.
Well, do we need any more clarification right now?
Are you talking about the code itself is coming up, or are you talking about the fact that the cell phone tower is coming up?
Well, the cell phone tower, no, because they already don't meet current code. No, okay, I apologize. My question was directed towards staff. Do you have the direction you need?
I do.
All right. Oh, we're still on code? Oh dear, okay.
We still have fencing and landscaping.
Okay. Let me put the PowerPoint back up. Okay, now this section is 1915 conditional use permits, and all of our public buildings and public public utility buildings and public buildings are conditional uses in any of the zones that they're allowed in. So under the conditional use section, we wanted to add additional specifications related to these sites, because a lot of times you don't need to have a lot that's equal to the particular zone that they're in. Some of these could go on very small pieces of land. Some of the buildings are 10 by 10 or things like that, and are just there to cover a pump or things like that. So obviously there's a whole gamut of public utility facilities, because you also have large power substations and sewer treatment plants and things like that. And so this was intended to address all of those categories. And what we wanted to suggest is that these facilities are exempt from the minimum lot size, width, frontage, coverage, and building size requirements in the underlying zone. And then for setbacks, we have two different requirements: one for buildings that are intended to be occupied, so have people working them in them, and one's for buildings that are not intended to be occupied, that just have to be serviced on occasion. So for unoccupied buildings less than 200 square feet or shorter than 15 feet, no setbacks are recommended, except that they would not be built on the public utility easement. And then for large buildings and occupied buildings, they would meet the underlying zone setbacks. And then all other buildings and below grade structures, the setback would be equal to the public utility easement. And then also, because it's a conditional use permit, you could, through that process, require additional setbacks if there's specific criteria related to why that setback is required. So fencing, right now, as you know, the code doesn't allow chain link fencing. However, on some of these sites, we wanted to consider allowing that. And what is proposed is that if they're within 200 feet of existing residential, that chain link wouldn't be allowed, or if they're 100 feet from not any street. So we had proposed any street, and the Planning Commission had changed that to any street larger than a local street. So if it's within 100 feet of a local street, it could have chain link. But if
Can
it's
you help
in-
me understand their reasoning? That seems exactly backward to me.
So their reasoning was that on arterials and collector streets, that those sites have a lot more visibility than local streets, because the local street has the neighborhood traffic, but it doesn't have the regional traffic. So that was their reason, is that those sites are more visible.
So just on that, and Councilman Porter and I were talking about this, it seems backward because on a very large street, you've got a very large street buffering things, and you're not going to be right next to a house. Where on a local street, you're going to be right next to a house who can't have chain link fence. So it makes no sense to me to have, look at my beautiful yard, chain link, ugly, catching weeds, kids cutting through it, climbing over it. It just doesn't make sense to me. So for me personally, I think that's backward.
And then one of the other things that's added is that barbed wire would be allowed if there's a legitimate safety concern related to public health, safety, or welfare. And then the other sites that can't have chain link, that the fence type would be determined by the owner with final approval by the city council through the site plan process. And 8-foot max would be the height of the fence. And then for landscaping, so some of these sites, for example, we have Pond 8, and although it's a pond, we don't have water services to that site. So we have a pipe going to that site to fill or draw from the pond, but we don't have sprinklers or things like that at that site. We don't have the ability to add sprinklers to that particular site. That's just an example. There's other situations where it doesn't make sense to landscape the site, such as the area around a water tank. And so this allows that when it's, what it allows is if water's not reasonably available, that we don't landscape those sites. So just adding a little bit of, because the code requires landscaping, and this is just saying if you can't water it, that we shouldn't require landscaping.
Thank you.
Right.
I remember reading something about using the native scaping or whatever we're calling it now.
Right. Yeah, and I believe that's in there as well. And then the site and architectural design standards. So this is similar to what we discussed with the cell tower buildings, that whole section doesn't apply. So that the site and architectural design standards require a certain amount of glass, require 2 colors of materials and things like that. And where these are more basic structures, we wanted to exempt them from those sections, but not 100% exempt them. So we're still requiring masonry and a pitched roof. And then there are some situations where a temporary or a portable structure might be needed, and we're suggesting that only municipalities be allowed to have those, and that the portable structures don't have to meet the architectural standards.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with the ginormous freaking elephant in the room. If you look at the definition for a building public, it talks specifically about intended owned and intended to be operated by, or et cetera, the United States of America, state of Utah, any subdivisions including counties, municipalities, et cetera. So I have serious issues with a bunch of this because it talks about the fact that you are making it so that any public building doesn't have to do any of the landscaping. They can say, oh, we're not going to landscape on the interior of our site. And they could come in and say, oh, well, we're going to do chain link fence even though it's not allowed. So University of Utah Hospital is a public facility. All of our city buildings are public facilities. So they could come in, any of these, UTA is a public building, it's a public entity. It's going to be even more public if UDOT takes it over like they want to. So, I mean, all of these buildings, huge. Any of these buildings can then come in and say, yeah, we're not actually going to do interior landscaping. Sorry. So we need to definitely fix that. That's a serious problem.
So the state of Utah, as well as the federal government, already claim preemption from our land use laws, and any compliance with those is usually voluntary. So they already say that they're not subject to our land use laws.
But do we actually want to give them more ammunition to come in and say, I'm not going to put one tree, one shrub, anything, I'm going to do straight gravel across the
But
whole
it's
thing?
only if water's not
Purpose of this.
available.
No, it's not. It's
I
not.
thought that's
No,
what-
part of it's not. Part of it is, yeah, yeah, exactly, no. So part of it isn't. It's not, so the landscaping in general or whatever, they don't have to do internal landscaping. They have to do external landscaping on the park strip, but they don't have to do internal landscaping. So we just need to make some wording changes because some of these are not acceptable.
Yeah, so the other issue we have as well is you have to be really careful where you make what's called the state legislature has rules against this as far as special laws that only apply to one municipality or one jurisdiction. That's what we were trying to avoid as well. We didn't want to come out and say the city of Saratoga Springs doesn't have to follow all these rules. So we wanted to create this exemption apply to any public building, which would make it more defensible. So we figured since the state of Utah, federal government already
Then
don't
if
have
that's
to
the case, then
comply.
you need to come in and be more specific about which public buildings, because there are a lot of public buildings, including ours in the city of Saratoga Springs, that need landscaping. There's no way we want to eventually build our new city hall and not have any internal landscaping.
That's going to be our choice. I
know
can't
it's our
imagine any
choice,
city council saying we're not going to landscape
but
the city
nonetheless,
campus.
let's say Mark loses his mind and decides that it's too expensive to landscape. He technically say, well, it's not in the code, and push for it. So, I mean, just as an
Well,
example.
that's why the council can remove Mark if he goes insane.
if I go rogue on that. So my primary concern is, right now, we're the only government entity that is following our code. The school district doesn't follow it, the county doesn't follow it.
But isn't that
the
their
state
problem,
doesn't
not
follow
ours?
it.
The others are right.
It doesn't mean they're right, but what we're looking for is, if as a council you want us to put those improvements in, and for a city hall, absolutely, it's what would be expected. But for example, our Pond 8, you know, we started going down this path, and it
That's
doesn't
different.
make sense to put landscaping
On the inside.
on the inside of this fence, because it makes no sense. The chain link request is another one of those things. You know, for example, you know, do we want to be able to secure some of these sites that are not next to residential homes?
And I will completely argue that that is not any more secure than any of the other fencing, because I can go up right now and show you the upper tank up at Harvest, and the fence is cut and pulled up and pulled down. So
Well, and
it doesn't,
Right, but I mean,
it
if-
really doesn't secure
But we
it
also
anymore.
get into a sustainability from a fiscal
Absolutely.
sustainability conversation on the top of the edge, Mount Saratoga. We're going to have a tank up there that we won't have the ability to landscape, that we won't
I
have the
get
ability
that.
to do some of these things. And so fundamentally, we're asking for the ability to make prudent financial decisions in some of these cases, and not create areas, for example, you know, with grass that we have to mow that's behind a fence that no one will ever step on except for the maintenance guys that are mowing the grass. You know, those kinds of things are things that we want to make sure that we've not painted ourselves into a corner and just basically are wasting taxpayer dollars because it doesn't make sense. And so,
Well, and I don't mind that argument, Mark. If you want to make that argument, that's fine. But honestly, the security, it doesn't fly, because it's not any more secure than any of the others, even with the barbed wire up there.
well, and there's a lot of elements to the overall conversation, which is why we're glad to have it. And if you'd like us to get more specific, we're certainly happy to do that.
It needs to be.
What we don't want to do, though, is, you know, and I think you brought this comment up at one of the recent council meetings on the amenities package for sports complexes. We don't want to be so specific that it paralyzes us going forward, and so we're working on trying to create that amenity package language that gives us flexibility where appropriate. And so if we need to do a little more work on that, that's great. But
all I'm
fundamentally,
saying.
we want to make sure, for example, when we put our pond out to bid, you know, do we want, as a council, you all get to make the decision whether we put the entire property in wrought iron fence or whether we go chain link on it. And that's the fundamental question that we're looking for is does it make sense to do something like that? It's a more expensive option, and it may or may not be the
Well,
right
and I think
choice.
that some of the code is appropriate. So for example, in that area, let's talk about Pond 8. It makes sense. It's not a currently residential use. I mean, it's an agricultural use, but chain link is allowed. The wire fencing is allowed in an agricultural use anyway, so it's not a big deal there. But you look at some of the other areas, and I think along our local roads, when you're in a development and they can't use chain link fence, it makes much more sense to do a nicer wrought iron or something else. There were several options listed in on that location, and then possibly even use, you know, a block wall or something on the other three sides so that it's not going to collect weeds for the residents and make an eyesore for the residents.
And those are the decisions that we can look at, but we wanted to make sure and give ourselves flexibility. It doesn't say you can't use other building materials. It just says you can use this material in this scenario.
Right.
And so that's kind of what we're looking for, is that flexibility to be able to make the right decisions financially for the community.
Right. So then, if you go to that, right in 1915-06, Sarah, this is what I was talking about before, on number 7. The very first one, A, says that this section does not apply to wireless telecommunications equipment, which is regulated by Chapter 1905. So I think this is what that section up above was referring to, only,
The others, the wireless telecommunication equipment is in 1905?
right, but what I'm saying is, why are you taking this out of 1915 and not taking what was in 1916 and doing the same thing to 1916? So if that was supposed to be referring to 1916, that's fine, but why would you refer to 1916 and not refer to 1915 up in the upper section? Vice versa, why would you refer to the cell phone towers 1905 in this section and not do the same thing in 1916? I guess it's just consistency about how you deal with things.
Well, okay, there was concern by the planning commission that the cell phone towers were trying to use both of these sections, and so they wanted clarification that this section didn't apply to the wireless telecommunication equipment, that only 1905, that they need to go to that section, because there's some things in here about the landscaping and fencing and things like that, that they didn't want that to be read as a double standard for the wireless telecommunications sites.
I guess if I'm understanding, in the last, when we were talking about the towers in the last conversation, why are we referring to that?
Because 1916 is the site and architectural design. So that reference was correct. It wasn't referring to this section. It wasn't referring to the conditional use section. It was referring to the architectural standards.
Sarah, I don't want to get you sidetracked, but I just noticed that this should say this subsection, so it's not the entire section. We're only talking about subsection 7, so anyway, I think when the council makes their motion, please add that back in as well. Or if they do make a motion.
We do. I was gonna say, well, yeah, but later on, but I don't think it's ready even later on, so. Okay, so again, just over and over again, we've got to work on the definition of what a public building is and when it applies and when it doesn't, because I think it's far too vague. So 90% of my comments are that, over and over again.
Do you have a suggestion on when you would like to see the landscaping standards applied or not applied?
Well, I think, for example, on a pump house next to a pond, you wouldn't necessarily want the landscape on the inside. But if you've got...
So if we did something similar that, like...
What if we did it
So-
for the occupied buildings versus the unoccupied buildings?
That's what I was leading to.
Well,
A pump house would be a non-occupied use.
but if UDOT wants to come in, let's say their salt
storage
shed,
shed?
their storage shed that they've got, and I realize that they didn't, but they've got external landscaping and landscaping immediately around their building, right, kind of by their entrance, that they wouldn't necessarily have to do.
But they wouldn't have to do it
How
anyway.
can
I
we
mean,
regulate
I know that they
anyhow?
don't have to, but why do we give them excuses to
Right.
make their stuff look like junk and therefore make our city look like junk?
We're gonna be asking for those things as well, but the question I have for Sarah, you're kind of the master of this. If we do the occupied versus the unoccupied and have this exclusively related to the unoccupied structures, does that work?
Yeah, I can do that. Is there support for that?
Makes more sense.
Yeah, at least it puts some controls on it.
Although I don't want bus yards, which we actually do have control over.
But that's an occupied.
Well, the structures are not, if they want to come in and just do bus yard structures, which I don't know that we
They
would
have to have
necessarily
an
let
office
them
or
do that, but, well, no, bus yard, we still have control over the bus yard. Remember, we were able to control that. Yeah. So the only other comment I have, besides those things we've talked about already, is on that same, it's F, landscaping F and little I. And this is, again, is just a little bit of verbiage change. So the second or third line down, sorry, building sites shall be landscaped with trees spaced 30 foot on center. It should be not more than 30 feet on center, because obviously we don't want to be out of compliance if we're at 29.5 inches. I mean, it's just, and if we want to go less than that, if we want to go 15 foot on center, we should be able to do that. So just not less than 30 foot on center.
Not less than. More than, not less than.
I actually don't have any additional comment on landscaping, and I think that was pretty thorough. Covered it. Thanks.
Do you have any comments, concerns on the whole public building thing other than the,
No, I do
No?
agree with defining the two on that. 'Cause it does make sense for the funds, not, I guess just not, like Councilman Bartsch was saying, just not making it easier or giving them ideas like that they can go with the lesser route.
Councilman Wilden?
I agree, excuse me, with the occupied versus non-occupied. One of the things we're talking about is chain link fences. I'm fine flipping that was suggested. Yeah, and I would actually, quite honestly, at least by the residential where we're saying 200 feet, I would be fine increasing that distance by a bit. And then on top of that,
So, on that topic, when we discussed it with the planning commission, we pulled up a couple of examples on the street view, and one of them was the corner of Pony Express Parkway and 800 West, which is a very visible corner, and right at that corner you have a pump house, or 2 pump houses or something like that, and so I think their reason behind that was you have a lot of traffic on those roads, so they wanted the more visible locations to look nicer.
you know, and that makes sense, and I think that's a good point, but I personally would like to see the distance increased against existing homes. And then on top of that, like, if there really is a security need to the extent that you need barbed wire, I would say let's do a different, I am fine with the chain link fence if there's sufficient distance. It's just if you get into the barbed wire, get that nag. But is there times where you can be in a position you could do a chain link around a pond, and this would be a good question for Jeremy, where you wouldn't need barbed wire and a chain link would provide sufficient security?
I think yes, the answer to that is yes, but we just want to preserve that option for us in the future should it be necessary. For example,
well, this particular,
well, so in my last city, we actually did have barbed wire on the top of our fences for our ponds and some of our critical infrastructure. And
Well, that's expected in Detroit, but
well,
I'm just kidding, sorry.
you know, I hate to say it, but you know, our demographics going to change over time,
Yeah.
and we at some point may need to do that. And so I'm just saying, let's preserve the option if we've got it.
Mark, this is the particular section you were concerned with related to Pond 8, and the planning commission changed that to address those concerns.
Yeah. So, for example, Pond 8, you know, there is a local street up there, and if you have adjacent to or within 100 feet of streets that are larger than local streets, if you change that and reverse that back, then it would then trigger us needing to we couldn't use chain link fence around, say, the pond at the top of Evans Lane.
Why don't you, instead of saying next to the street, why don't you just say to the house or to an actual residential property line?
Well, and again, you know, some of this was language that was taking place and morphing. You know, as long as we have the ability to use it within that X number of feet of residential uses, we're good with that.
Well, Mark is really hoping to have chain link around the pond site. We did some cost comparisons, and it was $100,000 to $150,000 difference between the chain link and the wrought iron, and that was discussed at Planning Commission. And so we did talk about within 100 feet of. It just said streets earlier, and the earlier version, and then the Planning Commission changed it to streets larger than local streets. So I think really the topic in general is, you know, whether or not we want to consider chain link at some of these sites.
There's two separate issues.
Even if they're visible.
There's the issue of being or close to residential development, and the Planning Commission identified they didn't want, you know, vehicles going by on collector roads to see the chain link. So they wanted the nicer appearance to the public. And there's the 200-foot rule that says from existing residential development. There's also the 100-foot or the local street
Well,
rule as
and
well.
existing development's tricky because all of Mount Saratoga is already an existing development. It's got its entitlements, therefore it's an existing development, even though there's not technically a house there yet on Mount Saratoga. So
They
that's a
don't have any
little,
houses, right? That's all open space.
yeah.
Maybe it's already in there, remind me, but is chain link has to be explicitly approved by the city council? But I mean, I'm fine with the concept, and I think we need to be good stewards of, you know, tax dollars, and that's why from a chain link
Well,
perspective.
it says that it is allowed, and this is a conditional use.
But if it's conditional use, it has to come to us for approval.
Right, so we have the ability to approve or
Okay.
not approve. Is that not correct?
So the city council should be able to determine whether or not it's appropriate in each instance, right?
Well, so with the conditional use, Kevin's explained to me that we have to have specific standards for conditions. So if we want a standard for chain link, we can add that in.
It has to be approved by the city
If
council.
determined necessary for security by the city council.
So,
On this issue, I'd say we're painting ourselves into an appropriate corner.
He likes it in the corner.
I mean, I want to give the city the ability to protect taxpayer dollars and at the same time protect, you know,
Residential
ourselves
properties.
and existing homeowners.
So,
I understand what you're trying to get to, and
so what,
I would
can we,
just say
can we just,
add.
what if we just removed that number 1 and just went
Yeah.
back to vinyl coated chain link is allowed for facilities more than 200 feet away from an existing residential property line or house, like an actual, because it's the actual house, right?
residential home.
Residential plat,
Residential unit?
yeah. Just add city council. Well, and to Councilman Wilden's point, could we just add at the end of double I, just add with city council approval? And that would give him that, you know, it's explicit that the city council has to approve chain link.
As long as you have reasons why they could deny it.
For the purpose of
approve it.
security.
I guess,
I mean,
Then you'll be able to make that determination. It's going to be a site-by-site determination, so I think it gives you the flexibility to do that.
okay.
I guess the other thing is looking at, I understand what the planning commission was doing in that, for example, Pony Express and 800 West, that's a huge facility there that would be a little bit unsightly to have chain link all the way around that, on that corner that everybody's driving by. So,
I mean, I get your point, but I mean, I drive through lots of other cities and they all have it on their major thoroughfares and you don't even notice it because it just blends in with the thing. I mean, I think what we're trying to avoid is putting it next to somebody's house, not
So-
necessarily next to somebody's
yes.
5-lane road.
But at the same time, so I guess one of the things is normally we require setbacks for fencing.
Mm-hmm.
And this would allow your 6-foot fencing, or in this case, actually 8-foot fencing, because they want to increase that too, right at back of sidewalk, because we allow fencing at back of sidewalk except for in the site triangle areas. Sorry, I'm choking on my nut. So do we want to put the chain links not allowed within, so I mean, so they have to push it back so it's not right up against the sidewalk?
I could deal with that.
Is that,
Well, and then I think
Then you have
if
to landscape
have
between the fence and the sidewalk, right?
Whatever,
this
with
was
city council approval, subject to, you know, security needs or visibility or whatever, I think we don't need to specify that in code, public building. Back a little bit.
So
And it gives flexibility, because maybe there's some consequence or some reason out there that we may want it to be next to a sidewalk in the middle of Israel Canyon.
I
I know
actually,
that's not our city, but
I actually,
Israel
Yeah.
Canyon's our city?
I think of,
Lower Israel, Katie, Upper Israel.
not the state.
however you want to move forward with it. We're good. Just, if you give us this flexibility, we're going to work within it, so.
So I would just say C2 that subject city council approval as determined for, you said something visibility and then security needs or something.
I don't know, I was thinking about maybe a certain length of frontage or something like that.
So why don't you noodle on that and bring it back to us here in a little bit? Do you have enough direction, Sarah?
Yeah.
No,
Sorry, I made it more confusing, sorry.
anyway, I think that's about it. We've all like vomited on paper quite a bit here. But I appreciate, I know this is a lot of work on staff's part and I appreciate you going through that and it creates good discussions and we'll get there, so thank you.
Okay, Councilman Porter?
I think I've interjected my comments throughout the conversation, so I'm good.
Okay. Sarah, you're good? You'll revive the horse so we can beat it again in about 15 minutes? Okay. With that, we'll adjourn to the City Council policy meeting at Tuesday, September 19th, 2017 at 7:31 p.m. For the city of Saratoga Springs, roll call tonight, we have Councilman Porter, Councilwoman Barch, myself, Councilman Wilden, Councilman Podeska, and Councilman McCombers asked to be excused tonight due to work-related travel. And I've asked Councilman Podeska to lead us in our invocation and Councilman Wilden to lead us in our pledge.
Audience, please rise and with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, public input. Time has been set aside for the public to express ideas, concerns, and comments. If you are here for the public hearing on the Code Amendments Title 19, please save your comments for the public hearing. Please be respectful in your comments. Please try and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody here for the public input portion? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public input at this time. Reports. Last Thursday, Councilman Porter, Councilwoman Barch, myself, along with city staff, had the chance to go before the Boundary Commission for the county on the annexations. Wednesday night. Yes, we had a chance to do that. They did rule in the favor of Saratoga Springs and the residents' property rights, but I would like to, on behalf of the council, Mark, your staff did an amazing job. They were well prepared. Jeremy, you did a great job with the engineering. Everybody did. We appreciate everything that you guys did, both as the residents and as the council. I think your hard work really showed that night. I don't know if you guys have something to add to that, or.
It was just nice to see them make a good choice, even though they somewhat chastised us, or so it seemed, for not working with our city or with our neighboring city. I think that it's important to recognize, and one of the landowners actually brought this up, that it's important to recognize that sometimes having overlapping boundaries is important because it gives the landowner a lot more choice, and that you actually end up getting a better product a lot of times because of that. So unfortunately, cities can't always agree, and that's just how it happens, and that's what the Boundary Commission's for, so it worked.
Again, thank you, Mark. Any reports from the council?
I had the opportunity to represent the city at Governor's Day last Saturday. Saw Chief there. This is the opportunity for the governor to review the National Guard troops. It was a really great event, and it really drove home just, I think that sometimes we forget as cities that the members of the National Guard are our fellow citizens, are our neighbors and friends, and so, you know, every neighborhood's got the salt of the earth sprinkled in there. So I just, it was a really neat event, and I appreciate Mayor giving me the opportunity to attend. So.
Thank you for attending for the city. Councilwoman Barch?
This last week, Councilman Porter and I, and as well as staff members, attended our Leagues of Cities and Towns. And it was, there were some interesting topics brought up. We'll see a lot of land use issues coming up with the league. Also, there are some interesting things that I'd love to talk to staff about. One of my last classes that I attended on branding of items and branding of the city, which was kind of interesting. So I'll just get together with Mark sometime and talk about that, and with David as well. So also just kind of a heads up in case you've heard, there's a little bit, Mayor and I also attended MAG's regional planning meeting Thursday, and there's a little bit of a fight between some of the mayors and the county commissioners on what exactly the role of MAG is and the commissioner's role in it. So just kind of an FYI, it's coming and it's a little ugly. So we'll kind of keep you informed as that goes and if we need any assistance.
Yes, that made the Title 19 discussion look short. Okay, Councilman Wildman.
Back, I believe it's Shalisa's team. Someone called in, spoke with the utility billing to set up their account. Said conversation. She was very patient. It was a long conversation, but she was very patient. Worked through it, very customer friendly. So if you could pass along that feedback, because often I know the only feedback they hear is, "Oh, they were terrible." Rarely do you hear compliments. So just pass that along to Shalisa's team that their good customer service is appreciated. As well as last Saturday-ish, or maybe the Saturday before, I was invited to participate in Eagle Project in Aspen Hills, where they worked on a roundabout, city roundabout, re-landscaped the thing, and very positive feedback, I think, from Rick. Is that right? He said, and they've worked with him a number of times, said he's really great, and it was a great opportunity, and they've done other things, apparently, this group, this scout unit where they've worked with the city that was able to fall within like a small budget, and they provided the labor hours and things like that. So please pass that around back to Rick, and I appreciate his efforts in coordinating, facilitating community service.
Councilman Podeska.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to attend Mr. Thornton's funeral. Recently, if you weren't aware, we lost a teacher at Vista Heights, car accident. Daughter actually had him. Took her and standing room only. Good turnout from Saratoga. He's much loved and will be missed. Report that funeral services went great. And family seems to be doing well.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything from staff?
Nothing at this point. We do need to have a closed session later this evening.
Okay.
Apparently,
Well, number 4 doesn't involve Mark, so just kidding. That is a joke. So
Okay.
3 was the
Wow, we're all like an attorney with a joke. Usually it's attorney jokes.
well, 3 is administration and 4 is staff. So no, I just wanted to give the council a brief update on the annexation process and what happens post boundary commission decision. So the decision's not final. The city can't move forward until the commission has issued the written decision. So in other words, the annexations are still on hold. I did ask.
The attorney will write it based on on their findings from the Thursday meeting in our favor within 30 days of the meeting, correct?
Right. And I did discuss that briefly with the deputy county attorney. He didn't seem like he was in any hurry to get that written decision issued. Right. So once that happens, then we'll proceed forward with bringing that to the council for the public hearing. And then at that point, we'll move forward with finalizing, wrapping those up. So that really is the process. Unfortunately, we have to wait. We don't have to wait until, that 30-day appeal period. Actually, it's 20 days. So once the written decision is issued, there's a 20-day appeal period. We don't have to wait for the expiration of that period. We'll just move forward with the annexations as if they're final and not appealed.
Anything else? Okay, perfect. Okay, there's, want to jump to business item 1, the library board appointment. Kevin McMillan from the board is here. Do you have anything you'd like to say, or? Wilden said you had a lot to say for us. Okay, then I will entertain a motion to, I think just turned off, sorry.
I just had one question. The names in the ordinance don't match.
Yes.
That was corrected.
Okay.
I apologize. It was caught in the first paragraph, but not the second. So that's been corrected in your Dropbox, and Cindy wanted me to make sure that I pointed it.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
It's supposed to be Christie, right?
Yeah, that,
Christy Jepson.
all right.
Okay. Okay, thought so.
Sorry, I hadn't opened the ordinance since a couple days ago, so.
I'll
Yes, and this
move-
is for a 3-year appointment.
Right.
I'll move that we approve Christy Jepson to fill the term for the library board ending June 30th, 2020.
Second?
I have a first from Councilwoman Barch, second from Councilman Podeska. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Councilman Porter?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we have a public hearing for the code amendments to Title 19, multiple sections, cell tower, public buildings, public utility sites, ordinance 17-27.
Okay, these were covered extensively in the work session. However, as you mentioned, changes to 1902, 1905, and 1915, and then council can discuss that as they choose, and there are several motions to choose from.
Okay, we will open the public hearing. Is anybody here to comment on the code amendments to Title 19? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. The council have more?
There's a bunch I left off. No.
No, my only question is does staff actually need time to go through and fix what we need, which is my guess.
Sounds like we
I
probably
think-
did.
Probably, Mark, are we going to affect anything if we postpone this to the next meeting so the staff can make the appropriate changes?
I think Sarah was making some of those changes, were you not?
I'll have them all.
Yeah,
Okay, my only concern is we do have an item,
On?
number 2, on 8.
Can't we use
Which-
pending ordinance?
I would say,
Can we use pending ordinance and specify specifically that, you know, like, for example, the chain link is okay as long as it's pushed slightly back from the sidewalk area, which I don't think actually exists right now. And that the, you know, setback changes are going to be okay, those kinds of things? How do we do that?
You know, it's tough because a pending ordinance doctrine is usually meant as like a restrictive ability to subject land use applications to code that's changing. Not necessarily to use proactively, but the only concern is you may not decide. We don't know exactly what the decision is going to be right now, but I don't know if there's a way to split up the controversial issues and have those enacted at a later date, and then I think the ones
Sarah,
that-
did you get enough of the
just an
fencing
idea.
fixed?
Let's see.
Is it fencing and landscaping or just the fencing that's the big necessary, Mark?
I guess my question is Sarah, are you presenting other items this evening?
I don't have a lot,
Just
I
basically
do
what I'm
have other
suggesting
items
is,
on the agenda. Yeah, I'll be here till the end of the agenda, basically.
okay, I was just gonna
So-
suggest if maybe we hold off on the formal changes, I would suggest you do the public hearing on this. Most people, I think, you know, get the public hearing done, and then before you
That's
take
done.
final action, maybe we give a little bit more time
Go
for
back
staff
later in the
to-
evening?
Yeah, come back later in the evening and give staff a little bit. And I do know Sarah's got other items
What,
on the agenda.
what
as
other
well,
items
so-
are yours tonight, Sarah?
Number 6 and number 8.
Just do those and get them out of the way so she can go work on it.
So number 6,
Is it?
Well, right, and 6 is,
Oh.
there's a recommendation for denial because it doesn't meet the
So
code.
if the
Doesn't meet either one
council's
of the
okay
codes.
with that, Sarah, we'd give you time to work on that. We'll do all the other business items, postponing 6 and 8 to the end, and then public hearing item 1 we'll come back to. to allow you to make the changes.
I would suggest, though, that you do the public hearing right now.
We just
We already did.
Oh, yeah, close.
For you.
You're good. All right.
Okay,
We're good.
perfect. So yes, we will move your items to the last 3 tonight so that you can make those changes.
I'll go work on them and come back.
Okay?
And when you come back, Sarah, we'll put you back in the queue.
Yeah.
Okay,
If
You wait.
sounds good.
So item 2 needs to wait too also, Mark.
Yes.
Okay. This won't take too long, Sarah, no rush.
So, Mayor and Council, if I could, if you could jump to 6, I think there's some people waiting here for 6, which is the AT&T.
That's waiting for this.
No, he didn't come because he knew he was being recommended for denial, so he didn't come.
I meant, I think, Mr. Evans is here.
Oh, sorry.
Ken Evans is here, possibly for that. I would say if that's,
Yep, I'm fine with that, council. We'll move to item 6. Sorry for those following along. We are jumping all over tonight. Again, AT&T wireless tower site plan and conditional use permit. Justin Hadley, AT&T applicant.
Okay. I am gonna present that really quickly from here. So, basically this came in, we were looking at a potential site that a cell tower could locate, and our initial draft related to public utility sites would have potentially allowed this particular cell tower, and so the applicant went ahead and applied. However, after going through planning commission and the changes made after that, it doesn't comply with proposed or current code, so the recommendation is for denial.
Okay, is there any discussion on this from the council?
No, if it doesn't meet either of the code options, then I don't see how we can move forward.
Perfect, then I'll entertain a motion.
Microphone, and then I will move to deny the AT&T wireless site plan conditional use permit based upon the findings and staff findings.
Second.
Okay, I have a first from Councilman Wilden, a second from Councilman Porter. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Councilman Podeska?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously for denial. We will go back to item 3, and we will see you in a little bit, Sarah.
Mayor and Council, item 3 is an interlocal agreement with UDOT. As you know, we've been building our fiber optic system, or at least the conduit to lay the groundwork for it. UDOT already has a lot of conduit in the ground. This is kind of a cookie cutter agreement they've entered into with other cities that allow us to use their existing conduit where available, which would save us a lot of money, obviously. And the only thing they ask in return is that, like for instance, if we use that to hook up signals, then they can monitor those signals because they provide a lot of assistance with cities with traffic operations. So it's a very reasonable request.
Is there any questions on this from council? Talk about this, doing it for a
I
while.
just have one. Would this take care of the issues that they had previously on Grandview?
This doesn't, but they are hooking up Grandview to fiber with the project under construction. So once this project is done, they won't have to go on site to make adjustments. They'll be able to do that from the Traffic Operations Center.
Which is great news.
The one I'm primarily focused on this one is they have a conduit that runs up the old 73 on that alignment, and so we would be able to use that and wouldn't have to pay to install our own conduit on that alignment. And that would allow us to save a lot of money.
Okay, I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the UDOT fiber optic communication interconnection interlocal cooperation agreement, resolution R17-89 dated today.
I have a first from Councilman
Second.
Porter, second from Councilwoman Barch. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilwoman Barch?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Item 4, the UDOT Redwood Road widening betterment agreements number 5 and 6, and UDOT reassessment agreement for betterment items from PIN 10689 and PIN 15275, resolution R17-90.
Mayor and Council, as the subject line describes, this is actually 4 agreements, 2 betterment agreements, 1 cooperative agreement, and 1 reassignment agreement. The betterment agreements are for a few things that city is asking UDOT to do, but it's at our expense. One of them was dropping the overhead line that goes front of Parkway Boulevard. Again, towards our goal of getting rid of overhead lines.
Did I understand that right? They're keeping the pole though, so they can maintain their communications?
The pole is actually, Rocky Mountain Power uses that for their cooler program where you get a credit if you let them shut off your air conditioner temporarily during peak loads, and so that's kind of where they run that. It's a remote system, so the pole would remain, yes.
So they can make that a cell phone tower later?
You know, I'll let Sarah answer that. The reassignment agreement, as the first betterment agreement, covered things that were in this current phase and phases that are now part of the next one. We'll go under construction next year, and so this is a kind of a paperwork formality to make sure that those betterments are assigned to the correct PIN numbers. Now that they have 2 PIN numbers for 2 projects, and then the cooperative agreement have to do with drainage discharges up and down the road. So, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
I move that we approve item 4 as listed on the agenda, including resolution R17-90 dated today.
I'll second.
First from Council Porter, second from Councilwoman Arch. Any further discussion on the motion? Arch?
Aye.
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 Are we approving the option agreement as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can I ask a question on the restrictive covenants? So this isn't, we talked a little bit about this in our various meetings, that this was going to be a possibility or whatever. I guess one of my concerns is that, so it's, if I understood it correctly, 5 years from the last plat being recorded adjacent, and I'm not quite sure what that means, because what's adjacent? What about on the other side of the canal, though? That's still SLR property. But it's so this, because this restriction is just on the 26th. It doesn't include. Okay. Okay, and then where are we at on the soils testing and all of that? Well, one of the things I liked about it is that we actually have the option to get out if we need to, if we find something we don't like, so that's good.
This acquisition, as it goes through, along with the other 30 acres, this site will be 5.5 times larger than Neptune Park. So it's a significant acquisition. That with Inlet Park makes it almost, I believe, 100 acres down
And
in
then
that
the
area.
RC park and the proximity
With all
to
of
Public
Inlet
Works.
Park and all of that, it puts us at about 100 acres. With the residual 50 acres in the option agreement, that'll put us over 150 acres of open space and municipal, recreation space that we're preserving. So, I mean, this is a huge kudo for us as a community going forward. That, and I like to see Kevin reaching for the mic.
I just wanted to make sure you understood about the negotiation that happened with those restrictive covenants, that we successfully negotiated quite a bit on that. The original draft of it, they wanted to restrict us to just strictly city uses. We expanded that to allow other government purposes, post office, health department, etc. And then also the overnight storage issue was a pretty big issue for us, and so we negotiated quite a bit with that. So it allows us to store equipment that's incidental to the uses of those at those buildings, as well as store during periods of construction. So we did negotiate quite a bit with those restricted covenants, and felt like this was a good middle ground.
Okay. I will entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve the purchase and sale agreement with Suburban Land Reserve Resolution R17-91 dated today, and direct staff to move on the option for the other acreage.
We have a first from Councilwoman Barch,
Second?
a second from Councilman Podeska. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilman Wilden?
Aye.
Councilman Podeska?
Aye.
Councilwoman Barch?
Aye.
Councilman Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We are on to item 7, the Lake Mountain Development Agreement modification, conditions of approval, ordinance 17-28.
Good evening. Welcome to fall, apparently. Feels like winter in this room, however.
Perfect.
See if I can get this all figured out here. So, this is a request by the applicant representing Lake Mountain Development. So my job is really just to tee it up, remind you of the history, and give you just some general information about the project itself. And then I'll turn it over to the applicant to plead his case. And then finally, I've outlined some various options for you. There are also iterations of those options that you can consider, but we would like to move forward with some action on this at some point. You could approve it, revise the condition, continue it and ask for more information, or deny the request. So, there we go. So you probably all know generally where this is. It's toward the southern end of the city. This is a more exact location. And it is 116.99 acres. A little bit of background, and this was done fairly recently, so probably many of you remember. There was a rezone and concept plan that was approved. Well, rezone was approved by the City Council in February 2016. There were also some comments made on the concept plan. There was a lot of discussion during those meetings, and I went over the meeting minutes today regarding utilities and traffic and water and many of those things. And there was a condition of approval that said a development agreement had to be entered into. And one of those conditions in that development agreement is what's being asked to be modified tonight. So it included an off-site requirement to obtain right-of-way and to do improvements on what was then referred to as Foothill Boulevard improvements. The development agreement was never executed, and the applicant came in to file a preliminary plat application, and we realized that the development agreement has never been executed. However, the plat, the ordinance amending the zoning actually was recorded. So the Planning Commission and City Council reviewed the rezone and concept plan and granted approval on February 16th, 2016.
Nor, can I ask just a technical question?
Yeah.
How is that a legal plat recording and zone change if the DA wasn't done?
Well, it's
And
not
doesn't it
yet.
invalidate it?
It's not, really. I mean, the zone change ordinance was recorded, but it probably should not have been. And at this point, we are not allowing them to move forward until we have an executed development agreement. And the zone map actually still shows it as ag.
So just how do we make it so that doesn't happen before? Have we revised our process so that we have some kind of an alert that something like that comes up now?
That's a good idea.
This was simply a miscommunication. We needed to go to the recorder's office and make sure that they understood that the ordinance doesn't get recorded until the development agreement's signed. So at this point, the zoning is effective. We have to now initiate the action to undo that. If we can't work out these details of the development agreement, we would immediately proceed with doing that.
Okay, so I guess then my question was make sure that we get some kind of process in place so it doesn't happen again.
I agree. That would be, we're learning, you know. The concept plan is for a 254 lot single family subdivision. And both the Planning Commission and City Council gave an informal review and a formal review and comments back to the applicant. The staff also reviewed it and gave comments to the applicant as well. So this is the section that is in question. The development agreement, when the City Council approved the Lake Mountain rezone on February 16th, one of the conditions of approval was that the city enter into a development agreement with the applicant. And one of the conditions of the development agreement has to do with off-site improvements, on-site and off-site improvements to deal with the Mountain View Corridor or Foothill Boulevard. And the section specifically that the applicant is asking for relief on is Section 8B of the draft development agreement. And the developer shall be required to install, improve, and dedicate the Foothill Boulevard improvements and are as more fully specified in Exhibit E. This shall be in addition and not in lieu of all required road improvements in accordance with city regulations in effect at the time of the preliminary plat application. Furthermore, as an express condition of this agreement and the zoning request, developer shall be required to pay all road and transportation impact fees and shall not be entitled to any credits or reimbursements for the installation, improvement, and dedication of the Foothill Boulevard improvements. And then on your right is the attachment. So it includes not only property on the subject property, but also on an adjacent property that's owned by somebody else, sort of the gap in between those two pieces. So the applicant's request is considered a major modification to the development agreement, and the request was originally to just eliminate the development agreement. The rest of it is fairly, it's consistent with our standard development agreement. But we are recommending that you not really consider eliminating the development agreement, but that you consider whether or not that condition should be revised or removed. That's really what the applicant, that's your choice. And the applicant does agree to dedicate the right-of-way that's within the proposed subdivision. And then on your left is a draft of a study that was done, that's being done by MAG on potential alignment, and this one's refined further from the one that was done last year in 2016. So it's actually favorable to the applicant. There's less corridor, especially along the south of the property, but there still remains a big chunk in between the two pieces of property. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will turn it over to the applicant.
And then we'll start the discussion. You actually want to have a seat at the table in case there's questions afterwards.
Oh, I apologize. So I wasn't aware that that was the situation. It was news to me when the staff came back and said, oh, by the way, there was a development agreement that has never been signed and we need to get that signed. And then that brought up all kinds of different things. And once I got a chance to read it, I looked through it and I understood what was being required. And then I looked and saw that that was going, then we started to have some discussions about, okay, how do we dedicate these right-of-ways, or the reimbursements and those sort of things. And then it came up, well, that's probably going to be a UDOT road. Well, then that changed everything again, and all the circumstances just kind of evolved over time. So I apologize for all of, it was not intentional to my understanding to record or do anything like that. It sounds like it's just something that needs to be straightened around now, and so I appreciate you guys taking into consideration. We're requesting at this time, because that road now, because of the alignment, from what I understand, from what MAG has, it's not on our property on the southern portion, it's just crossing kind of that northwestern boundary. And as Nora commented, we said that we'd be willing to dedicate that right of way. We're willing to comply with whatever MAG wants to do in terms of that alignment. We will do all those sort of things, but being the fact that it's going to be part of the Mountain View corridor, it's going to be a UDOT road, the possibility for us improving that and doing that are kind of impossible. We'll have to work with UDOT as that comes in, and that's kind of how it works through their process as they go through those sort of things. And so we're asking for, basically, my initial, like as Nora alluded to, my initial request was, if everything else in there is just basically making sure that we participate and that we build our subdivision according to the code, do we need a development agreement? If we just build it in accordance with the R3 zone, which is there. Short of that, our biggest, I guess our biggest concern would be just that section 8A, which talks about the improvements in those requirements for that road. If that could be removed, then I think we would be happy to get signed and go forward, because then we can move forward with our planning and subdivision forward. So that's what we have.
Just a couple more comments, maybe. There's some options, and I think the concern is that primarily the off-site piece there. So there's some possible options for you to consider as you move forward with this.
Can you remind us, Nora, first of all, with the offsite, when you say the offsite, were we requiring originally everything between the northern piece that was on site and the southern piece that was on site?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the rezone is a legislative act, and so the city council has some discretion, a lot of discretion in terms of approving a rezone, and I think the thought was that because of the increase in density and the number of units that were proposed, that some contribution to building a foothill was definitely in order, and you're within your authority to require that.
Yeah, I mean, you remember this whole discussion about when it's appropriate to require things that may not be directly related to the needs of that particular development, correct? So the entire width of Foothill Boulevard, I think we'd all agree that this project isn't going to necessarily create the need for that. But where the city gave up something, which was a rezone, we can ask for more than what we would otherwise be allowed to ask for, and that happens fairly regularly. We gave up something and they agreed to give up something as well. And so it's completely, at this point, it's because you're amending a legislative decision, you still have the same legislative discretion. The standards for that decision is whether or not your decision is, whether or not it's reasonably debatable that it could promote the general welfare. That's a very low standard, as you know. And so really any reason at all that could promote the general welfare will be, your decision will be upheld in court. So, and then I would also say that the development agreement itself is a good tool. There's some language in there that protects the city. We don't want to see that go away, as Nora mentioned. So if you do agree to amend or remove that condition, we'd ask that the development agreement stay in place.
I like the fact that pretty much all these lots are quarter to third acre. See almost a half acre here. I mean, these are good sized lots
These
for
are all
the city,
10,000
so it's
square
great.
foot minimums, and that was what
That's
the land
great.
use element was showing. We weren't asking for any additional tighter zoning than what was already in the land use plan. So we did it straight
Yeah.
down the middle, kind
Just-
of, in that sense.
Just the way Kevin said that, I was like, these are all 10,000. These are the lots that we've been after.
So on the road width, one of the things that you may want to consider, and this is your option, is to maybe clarify that so that it's just maybe a local street cross-section to basically create the connectivity, and then as that road needs to widen, that becomes a UDOT conversation and, other developer conversation through that area. That may be something you want to consider. I mean, obviously we are where we are, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that that could be a smaller consideration.
So that was one of my concerns is, first of all, MAG, once again, and Jim, we need to get on staff about this. They are completely out of control because they still have not given us this information, and they keep handing this out to developers left and right. So I'm really actually rather ticked off with them.
Oh, yeah.
They're seriously, so in reality, this is a little premature.
Last Thursday, they said it wasn't quite ready.
Exactly. So
not.
that being said, and it's not ready, it's not finalized.
They said, and Gordon will probably chime in here, they said that they would try to have a draft to us by basically the end of October.
And the best part is that's a draft.
Yeah.
I
It's
understand.
not finalized, so.
It still has to go through environmental review.
This
and
has nothing
lots
to do with the
of-
development. It's just last Thursday, we're sitting in a meeting and they're saying it's not ready, yet they're handing it out.
Yes, they
For
are.
us to make
And you're not
decisions
the only
on
developer
something.
they've handed it out to.
Didn't need
Yeah, this isn't.
No, we're not, it's not at you, it's at MAG.
I had
MAG is
no
out
idea.
of line.
So, Mayor and Council, one thing that we did do, so for example, Fox Hollow, we met with them a couple of weeks ago here with City Council, and they've already, as part of their development agreement, were required to provide the road width as part of the consideration for that. That may be something that, benches as well. I mean, there's different developers across the city that have been required to provide that as part of their, entitlements and development agreements and things. So that may be something that you want to consider as well. And now the new alignment it kind of nicks the corner of it, where our previous master plan actually had a much more impactful. So I see this as really going a lot of,
Yeah, it's good.
a lot of favorable ways for the applicant. But those are things that you may want to consider as well. And perhaps instead of it, being too onerous of a road width that we require, maybe it's just that local road that connects.
Well, and that was my other comment, is that yes, it's not gonna be strictly UDOT, because we are gonna be responsible to get the first part of that in before they ever come in and widen it. They're not gonna come in and widen that for 30 years, but yet all these homes are gonna be there, and we're gonna need to come in and make those roads. So while I'm willing to give up, I'm gonna say the full width, I'm not willing to give up the regular width of the roads that they would be required to do for connectivity. I think it's gonna be necessary.
So and I just want to make sure that, speaking about the portions that are on our property on that corner portion, or are we supposed to build the road all the way through the Waldo property? It doesn't connect anything right now, right? There's nothing there.
Well, what we had talked about is the fact that Lake Mountain was going to come up.
Right, straight
or, sorry,
through.
Harbor was going to come up.
Yeah, Harbor comes straight
and
through.
connect into that. And that was one of the major points of connectivity that we were requiring.
Okay.
So for me personally, I would still like to see that connectivity, because if we don't know how long it's going to be before the Waldo property comes in. And that's still going to be a major way for these residents that are up on that north portion, that northwestern portion, to be able to get down to a major thoroughfare, to get down to Harbor.
Just this way. Go ahead. Stephen raised his hand first.
Councilman Wilden.
Go ahead.
Fair.
Yeah, and one other thing is maybe they build the arterial on just the corner of their property now, that northern corner, and then that bottom piece, instead of the whole arterial width down to what's basically going to be Harbor Parkway, maybe we let them build just the local section on that. I mean, so there's a lot of different ways to do this that would then, lessen the initial impact of what this is. Certainly.
And then it would also give us that
But please, we also have to consider that adjacent property owner is going to have to, give us the right-of-way dedication in order to be able to make that work. So
I guess my question.
That was my question, is how do I get Waldo to do that sort of stuff?
yeah, and that's something that we'll definitely work with them on, depending upon what the requirements are that you place on this
I
particular.
mean, I'm in control of ours, and we're happy to do whatever is within our control, but I can't really control those guys as much as anything
Right.
else.
I'm just trying to understand, Councilwoman Bartz, are you looking for a local road from the edge of his property all the way to Redwood? Or just down to this corner?
Just down to that corner where it connects in, because Harbor is supposed to come up and connect into that area.
Okay, I was just.
Here to here.
Yeah.
Harbor's on the very southern border, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify
So
that,
just
that you
all the
weren't
way
asking him to build
across?
a road all the way to Redwood.
It's basically point to point. So where it crosses your property there and where it was crossing your property on that southern
To the
point.
southern property
Basically
line.
from like Beta Street down.
Oh, I see.
Because that was one of the things that we were looking for, that connectivity to Harbor, because that's Harbor. Harbor's not the very, very far south street. Harbor's that one that comes
Yeah, it's on
along
the southern border of our property.
of your
correct.
property, yes. Yeah.
So
And that was one of the things that we had talked about multiple times, is we need to get that connectivity in there so that we have other ways for the residents to access it for safety.
You're saying connectivity across the Waldo property.
I mean, ideally, yeah. Because we've talked about having, you don't have connectivity to the north. You don't have, for that section, you don't have connectivity to the north, it dead ends there, and you don't have connectivity to the south. And you've got many, many more than 50 homes in that area, and that's one of those things that we require. You've got
Second access.
that second access
Right, I
to
think
a major
And I
area.
agree, and I think that one of the conditions that I saw was going to the north when we first were running through the plats, is they were requiring that we had those easements going to the north, and we provided that second source of connection going to the north portions.
Well, I think, yeah, so you're connecting in at Harrier.
Yeah.
Is that Harrier? Is that in there? That's in your area?
So in those areas on there.
Yeah. So they're connecting in at Harrier up here.
So, and this is one of those
But
kind
you've got
of-
that whole section that doesn't, they have to come all the way down and then get in. They can't easily get to a main road.
Yeah, and, you know, do you really want to make him build the arterial right through their corner, or do you just require the
The local.
The local, but
But
the arterial right of way.
But what does it connect to is kind
Yeah,
of
that-
Should
that's
come
my.
down, again, we talked about this last time. It should
Bring
come
it-
down and connect, Harbor should come up.
to Harbor.
But shouldn't that be
So are we
the?
trying to connect Harbor to Beta and Alpha Street?
Beta and Alpha. What are you talking
The
about?
name of the street.
Oh, that's in their fake names in there. Yeah.
But right now it's in the Harbor,
The Har-
Harrier's right here.
Right.
And then it would split.
Well, I mean, ideally, I think, for what I think, and this is what we've talked about, you've got Harbor coming up. It should continue up and connect in
Yeah.
to that area.
Right, but that's on
Maybe ask
somebody
them to
else's
build
land.
stuff here.
So Mayor and Council, one thing that I think is a fairly large change, and we still don't know the final outcome because MAG is not there. This would probably be in some of the latter phases of their particular project. Hopefully by then, the whole MAG alignment will be addressed. As it currently stands, I see not a lot of value in just building an arterial road across that corner, and potentially a local road down to Harbor if it doesn't extend to the north. And if there's not a lot of great connectivity to get from that location up to Fox Hollow. The road that connects into Fox Hollow is critically important because what we've experienced is if there's something that happens on Redwood Road, there's no connectivity from the south to the north. And this would at least allow local street connectivity to get to the north in that scenario, up at least into Fox Hollow, which then allows us to connect all the way up to Jacob's Ranch. And then we have this gap problem as well. Where the road originally was through their property, it made a lot more sense to make that a requirement. And at this point, just seeing that little connection piece and then building an offsite road, if it doesn't connect to the north, it's kind of a road to nowhere, and maybe it's premature to build it. But maybe what you do in lieu of that is get them to dedicate all of that right-of-way right now so that it's taken care of, free and clear, and is off the table. And then, you know, we're going to need to know what MAG's ultimate decision is, but this at least lets them get moving on the first phases of their project.
So you're saying just dedicate the entire right-of-way for the eventual freeway on that north
On their
corner.
property and make that the requirement. Basically exchange that for some road construction and stuff, and then they can plan around that and they can move forward. I've not talked about to the applicant, I'm just throwing something out there. If they're willing to do that, and then that way they're kind of done with the obligation. But before, if you remember that green line, you know, that went right through their property.
This is
and
one of the frustrating things for me, Mark, because when we first saw this plan and we were looking at this plan, MAG's plan at the time had Harbor coming off and coming further to the south and out. And this is still a draft plan. We don't actually know where Harbor's going to end up. So originally, we talked about the fact that Harbor should go right up that south edge of their property, and half of that right-of-way should come out of the south edge of their property, if, you know, not all of it, however that's going to work.
And
But
that could be a
so
requirement of
they're
this.
kind of getting 2 bites of the apple here, because before we changed we looked at the plan and we changed it because it was going to go to the south. Well, now we don't know where it's going to go, but now you also don't have to do the other part of the roadway. And so it's frustrating because this is premature. It's just premature.
And possibly what we could do is kind of similar to what we did at Wildflower is maybe they do build the half width of Harbor Parkway to the western edge of their property and extend Harbor Parkway up, and then, you know, they dedicate that top corner, and then, you know, they've then, you know, made a contribution that we can live with, because if it, you know, once they build houses on the corner of their property, that's pretty much set the western alignment. You know, once they get a little bit further into their approvals and they actually start constructing, those questions will be answered. And at that point, it's for MAG to shift their alignment and make those decisions elsewhere. But I would suggest those are some options that you can consider, and perhaps the applicant might be favorable of some of those suggestions.
Not to belabor the point, but you could, there's a lot of different options, of course, but you could we could have part of the problem with the condition, now that I realize it after the fact, is that it was very specific, and I wanted that specificity because I thought it'd be easy to get out of it if it wasn't more specific. But in this case, since the alignment isn't determined, you could just say anywhere where it crosses the applicant's property, they have to dedicate that portion of the property to the city or UDOT. Another option is, because Harbor Parkway is more than just a local road, which would probably be the minimum requirement, you could require the full improvement and dedication of Harbor, not the dedication, but the full improvement of Harbor Parkway. Well, I guess there would need to be a dedication as well. That could be the requirement instead of this. Otherwise, there would have to be, you know, we would issue impact fee credits.
Well, that one, I mean, I have to say that option sounds more logical to me than building this road through somebody else's property that doesn't connect to anything, so. Yes, but it's not necessarily something we want to repeat, so.
Yeah, and, you know, from my standpoint, going back to what you said, Mark, you know, the portion of that's on my property, or that we expect to be on the property or will be on, I totally want the connectivity. We understand what has to happen there, and I would love the requirement to be limited to what I can physically control, which is what's on my property. If it's the half width of Harbor, and dedicate the portion that comes through in the corner when that is determined finally, we can be okay with that. That's okay. What I'm worried about is any requirement that requires me to go work with an adjacent landowner who then realizes all of a sudden they've got an extreme amount of leverage because I have to be able to do that, and then I can't control that, and that just makes it really hard to do anything at that point. If I have what's on my plat and what's in with my control, happy to do those sort of things. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So one of the things I don't see on here is Harbor is supposed to connect into Mountain View Corridor here, and they're not showing that on their alignment at all. And
I don't know that shows all the connectivity, but I think you're right. I think there's supposed to be something on there in the future.
So then, because this is straight freeway, that would be an interchange type scenario, which would take more land than just the right-of-way width, the normal right-of-way width. Yeah.
The question was about where the intersections are going to be. Is Harbor going to be, is it?
Harbor is slated to be one of the.
It's one of the connections.
I thought it was, you know.
So I think, Mayor and Council, if I could, I would suggest build a half width of Harbor Parkway on their property, and I realize that it's going to meander a little bit onto their property to get that half width, but what we'd be looking for is sidewalk, curb, and gutter on the north side, and then the full asphalt width, and then the southern property owner would then be required to make the other improvements, but at least that would give us some connectivity to the northern part of their property. It extends Harbor Parkway to that location, and then I would say get the full width of the right-of-way through that corner piece dedicated to the city and just be done with it. And unless your roads connect
And Mark,
in that location, I would say not necessarily have them
so
build.
something I was just looking at on that map, and maybe is Gordon retrieving the,
He just,
did he go to retrieve the draft copy?
Perhaps.
Okay, because what I was looking at is I actually see a bulbing out of the freeway further to the south, and so maybe they're not talking about harbor connecting in.
Yeah, right on the edge.
Do you see that right on the very southern edge of the actual picture where it starts to bulb out? So maybe it's not, and if that's the case, then maybe we only need to go up to whatever that upper road is instead of coming all the way to the Beta Road. Is that what it is? The Beta Road. Instead of coming all the way up the entire southern border.
but yeah, and again, I would say any right-of-way dedication, just get that dedicated, you know, at this point, and then make harbor, you know, the other components.
What we can with the information Scott's given us. Well, they still haven't got it to us, but apparently everybody else has got it. We thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, Fox
Happy to
Hollow
do
shared
whatever
their
I can
portion
for
also. So, I don't know.
Pasting them all together, we'll finally.
Do you have that, Gordon?
Interchange that they're talking about, sometimes draft, is south of this property.
So they're not having harbor connect up to Mountain View Corridor.
That's correct.
Remember, there could be development that goes west of Foothill Boulevard too.
So they could
So
do like
there-
an
there could be
overpass
an
kind of thing, or an
underpass
underpass
or
either
overpass,
way, but
right.
they wouldn't have an actual interchange.
And the irony is I think the initial build condition will likely be more of a local road anyway.
Well, yeah.
And then as it grows into whatever it needs to become over the next few decades, it would likely expand. And I think for sure in the local connections, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be there. And then anything western to that will need that access point, whether it's an overpass or an underpass or, you know, whatever that turns out to be.
Okay, so then my preference then, if that's the case, and they're looking at this alignment, my preference then would, I think, be the full dedication of the right-of-way that goes through their property, and that kind of dictates then where MAG is actually and UDOT are actually gonna put the road. And then strongly dictates, yes. They could technically, but they don't usually. Right. And then on the south border, require harbor to be continued up to their Beta Road. Is that,
Which one is the Beta Road? I can't see
The-
it on
it's-
the map.
it's the northern one, so there's that southern cul-de-sac.
And
Yeah.
Got Alpha, Harrier, and West.
Continue along your southern border. So that's Alpha and that's Beta. Okay. So that's my preference.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the access that makes all the sense in the world. And this is just the concept plan, so when we come back in with our preliminary plat, it'll be in, you know, general conformance with this. And if there's any other little nuances, we can talk about it at that point. But I anticipate it'd be just like this.
so, may I think we keep the MDA, as you suggested, with the modification, dedicate the full right-of-way for the foothill where it crosses and build your portions of the road. That, just want to make sure I was on the same.
Is that, okay, that looks good.
That's all within my control, and that's what I was asking for. So
Perfect.
thank
We
you
can do that.
guys. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
working-
being willing to work with us tonight.
No, you guys, thank you. Like talking through it
So I
helped.
will do it,
think
yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
get
this,
there.
this requires a motion as well as
Okay.
adoption of the ordinance, and then staff will work on the specific language based
Perfect.
on your direction.
Councilwoman Barch is ready to make a motion.
Okay, I move that we approve the Lake Mountain Development Agreement modifying conditions of approval according to our conversation in, and ordinance 17-28 dated today. And those conditions were that the entire right-of-way on their property for the Mountain View corridor be dedicated, and that the half width of the Harbor Parkway be continued along their southern border up to what they're identifying as their Beta Road.
And then do we also want to include development agreement execution?
I said the development agreement, so yes.
Perfect. Have a first.
Second.
So a first from Councilwoman Barch, second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilman Podeska?
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
And just a random question, why are we calling this the Lake Mountain Development Agreement when it's not actually part of Lake Mountain?
I don't know.
Just my
I
question.
mean, I think the plat is called Lake Mountain Plat, isn't it? I mean, that's
Is it
one I
part of the old
understand.
Lake Mountain development?
Well, yeah, you're right, but I think.
Because the
that-
Lake
Might wanna
Mountain-
Actually, the
might wanna change the
application
name.
had that in there, yeah.
It has
Happy
a
to do it,
junior
I just
on
didn't
there.
know. I mean, that's.
The name will have to be changed.
Okay, because I'm pretty sure there is a Lake Mountain development with the original Lake Mountain development.
Yeah, there's
What's
plats, Lake
confusing?
Mountain plats.
I'll suggest that on our application, then
No.
we get that taken care of. That was just something that I inherited, so I'll make sure that we get
Yeah,
it
yeah,
fixed.
just make sure that it's not conflicting
it's
with
not
other
confusing,
development
for
agreements that
sure.
we have.
Okay, thank you guys.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we will keep plugging along, how we said. We'll do number 9. The approval of the secondary water rights purchase agreement.
I move.
Well, yeah, if you know, I don't think,
Dude.
if there's any discussion needed, we're just
I will
acquiring some
entertain a
secondary
motion.
water.
I move approval of the secondary water rights purchase agreement.
Okay, I have a first from Councilman Wilden. I have a second from Councilwoman Barch. Any further discussion?
This is a great price, by the way.
It is a great price.
So,
Okay, Councilman Podeska,
Aye.
Barch,
Aye.
Porter,
Aye.
Wilden.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Number 10, the fee schedule amendments for the planning, development, and engineering fees.
Mayor and Council, we have Zions Bank here with us. They'll be doing a quick presentation. I'm actually going to go join you over at the dais for a second because I'm ready to stand while we go through this next issue.
Thank you for this chocolate, Susie.
You're welcome. I hope they last. Should have brought more.
Did you get any with Chris sitting next to you?
Yes, he actually threw them at me.
So, Mayor and Council, we've got Susie and Scott with us this evening. They've been working on, they've been working. I got a clicker.
No, we have that.
Yep. So we've been working on a fee analysis for a while. And I'll kind of point out to you in just a second what's going on. You've received a PDF of this. We wanted to make sure you had a hard copy for tonight's conversation as we go through this because, you know, it'll be germane to our conversation going forward. So if I can, let me just kind of quickly point to a couple of things. You've seen this chart before as a council. This is something that I think is kind of the critical element of what's been going on in our community. You can see our population is the shaded gray area in the background. The blue and the kind of mustard yellow is the building permits that we've been issuing throughout the community. And as you can see, the orange line up near the top corner of the graph shows basically what we think our occupancy population is. And as of September 1st, so a couple of weeks ago, we would estimate our population at just a hair under 30,000 people. Basically, our projected population based on the outstanding building permits is going to be just over 30. That's as of right now. Those are active building permits that are in the pipeline right now. So our population effectively has been growing dramatically. The challenge that we have is you can see this tremendous growth, and I think that this is a great graphic to demonstrate the growth that we've had. But the challenge is, and you've seen this chart as well at some of our retreats, is that the planning department fees, and the next slide's going to show the engineering department fees, are not keeping pace with the workloads that we've got. And so we've seen this. You directed us at our council retreats in the past to come back with a fee analysis that corrects this and adjusts this. So these are the planning department fees. These are the engineering fees. And the engineering fees also include, like Mark Edwards' department and the building inspection, capital building inspection department and our engineering department. This is fees that historically have not been getting covered as part of the development process. And so we've added these fees to this study so that you can come back and we can have the conversation relative to this. But you can see since 2002, in both of these scenarios, there's just these enormous funding gaps between what it's actually costing us and what we're actually collecting directly for these fees. Now, we've been covering those gaps, you know, using sales tax, using property tax, using other revenues in the city. I'm not suggesting that we're going to get a full 100% cost recovery on this. In fact, as we go through the scenarios, we're going to recommend slightly less. And so there will still be some of those fees covered through those various other funding sources. But what we wanted to do was highlight the tremendous need for this. And, you know, from a deficit standpoint, we're millions and millions of dollars in the hole on providing these services for our community. So with that, I'm going to take my seat. I'm going to give Susie the clicker. You're welcome to stay seated. Just talk into the mic, and then we'll start working through kind of our presentation and the proposed fees that we've got for this. So with that, Susie.
Great, thanks, Mark. That was a perfect setup for us. So knowing that we had these gaps between revenues and expenses, how did we go about establishing fees? There are really three main steps. The first, the most obvious one, is to look at direct costs. That's the actual person handling the application, meeting with the applicant, doing any of the paperwork, the supplies, equipment involved. Then there's also indirect costs, and these are often overlooked by communities and cities, and generally you will find that their fees are fairly close to the direct costs, but indirects are not involved. I have not been included sometimes. And so there's really two areas where we look at indirect costs. You're going to have indirect costs within each specific department that provides planning and engineering type services. So for example, some of the services that planning may provide may be fee related, and others may just be if someone comes in and queries at the desk or whatever, they're not fee related. But there's also going to, and so the direct costs just relate to that direct time spent with the fee related. But then in addition, you have meetings, training time, supervisory time, and those costs can then be spread over both the fee and the non-fee related proportionately. And I'll show you an example in a moment. So you have the indirects within this city department, and then you also have indirects for your overall city administration, Mark's time, legal time. That type of thing can also be proportionately shared. Then when we get that all said and done, we have an actual cost, but then we look at a couple other things. One is the competitive market. Some fees really are competitive with what's going on in cities around you. You want to be at least aware of those. And the other thing is, what is your current fee? Are we going to increase the fee by 5 times in 1 year, or are we going to ramp up and just do it a little bit at a time if it's an area where we've been a little bit behind? So those are the main considerations as we look at these fees. Okay, so here is the sample department indirect cost allocation that I was just telling you about. So you're going to have the fee-related services, and you're going to have the non-fee related services there, and then the team meeting and training time, which may in this example take about 10% of the planning department's time. The costs for that 10% are then allocated amongst the non-fee related services and the fee related in that proportion of their cost. And it adds an additional $2.90 labor cost per hour to the direct cost time, the direct time involved. So here are the indirect cost allocations by department: planning and development, administration, and legal. You can see this is how we did it, to just give you a little bit of detail there. Okay, then administrative, so not the department indirect costs, but for the administrative, these were the departments that were added in. We looked at their costs and we added them in for all of these departments as well. So some in general are observations on this, that where your past fees generally reflect your direct costs. People had a good sense of the direct time it was taking them, but that was about it at best, and in some cases not even that. One thing that we did differently here too is we set out really clearly in your fees the base number of reviews and meetings that were included in each service, and then because the complexity of some developments requires additional time, which is now counted separately after that base number. And finally, before I jump into the booklet, we just want to tell your city staff thanks. They jumped in and put in a lot of time. You'll see some spreadsheets that fold out in here. They had to fill out tons and tons of hours in all your departments. Scott worked with a lot of departments. I jumped in. Jeremy was great, and Holly. They really are good, so we appreciate their help. This is kind of tedious, at times to go through and figure how much time you spent. So just quickly to give you an idea of how the booklet works, because you'll need some time.
Before we jump onto that, Susie, real quickly,
yeah?
One thing that I wanted to point out is we were able to take and look at some of the city works data that we had that we're starting to track. Over time, we will build a much better database of the exact time. So far, based on what we've been doing, we use the best information that we have, and we think that this is a fairly accurate portrayal of what we're actually experiencing. And then over more time, the more and more developments and applications, the better our tracking methodology will be.
So that kind of leads into a question I have. Hopefully I can just do this quickly, but we've changed our process so that we don't have so many redundant meetings, and we're making the developers actually submit completed applications before they get to progress, instead of just randomly giving us some of the information. So would that affect the labor and time spent?
Somewhat, but
Is that only on a few cases?
This is the pretty standard stuff. Kimber and I spent a lot of time, especially with Susie, before she left, to say, okay, what is a typical application going to need?
Okay.
And we weren't thinking of the outliers in setting this. So you'll see the number of meetings and the number of reviews as probably a very small number relative to what we've historically done. And so, for example, you're going to see that we were trying to be, erring on the side of caution, and then basically making it very clear that, if you go beyond this number of whatevers, then we start to add those costs back into it, because at some point it just becomes ridiculous. And I think one thing, to point out, we spent a tremendous amount of time working on form-based code, and all of that time got lost when the applicant decided to not pursue that 4 years worth of work that never became a reality, and we just don't want to head down that path again.
Right, and I understand that, but I also want to make sure that we're not charging other developers for that 4 years of work. We had one developer that didn't work well.
We think that this gives us a good matrix, and if the council decides to change your processes, then we could certainly go back and very easily reduce this. We're not going to be recommending a 100% cost recovery on this, and so by going less than that, wherever we decide to fall, we would be recommending something that is less than that, so that certainly gives us some flexibility, and that's already built into that. If you wanted, you could do a full cost recovery, but fundamentally we thought we were already being very conservative in giving the benefit to the applicants.
Okay,
in these
I
cases.
appreciate that. Thank you.
To add to that, I mean, we're doing now, and I don't think we did this before, at least at this detail, cost per additional review meeting, so their initial fee has specifically how many meetings that gives them. And then now, if it's a labor-intensive development agreement or application that gives us the flexibility, or something that says we have 15 findings and conditions, it's going to take more reviews by staff, then that gives additional fees. Sorry to insert myself there.
No, that's good.
And I want to follow back up on that. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is coming back to the council with a bigger picture that talks about how do we streamline processes, and we're going to be coming back to you in coming weeks and months with that conversation, so that we can continue to look at, where can we modify our processes to make this go faster and smoother. But ultimately, this is where we are today. We would recommend that the council take a look at these fees. We can go through those tonight. We don't have a resolution for you tonight to formally adopt these. We want to let you think about it. You give us some direction, and then we'll come back next council meeting with a specific enacting legislation that puts these fees in place. So we did want to, have kind of this work session, work discussion with you on these things, because there's a pretty big swing in how this could go.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, because this is, there is a lot to digest here. I looked through it in the packet, but, like as I was telling Councilwoman Barch, about halfway through my brain started to melt from looking at all the numbers. So
well, and truthfully,
it is good to be able to have this discussion and talk about it.
Have some more talk.
That's
And
why we
contrary,
wanted
Councilman
to
Walden
put
is
this in
throwing
your
a party
hands,
over there.
because sometimes it's easier to look at something, and it's an analysis that's this complex,
Much
to be
easier.
scrolling back and forth in a PDF. We felt like this is something that we
This
need
is-
to memorialize.
This is good.
And to Susie and Scott, they've done a great job. So we're pleased with where we're at.
So just one comment if I can. Sorry, is that okay?
Councilwoman Barch had one comment, but I was going to say, I think most of the council would like to take and digest this and come back for a meeting and discuss it, because there's a lot to digest in here.
So one of the comments that I had is that for example, on the rezone, I really like that the rezone fees are kind of tiered in the proposal, so that you're actually incentivizing those who want to downzone, and then actually not penalizing, but really truly paying for costs, including those indirect costs for those that want to increase the density from what our general plan recommends and things like that. So I actually really like that
Mark and Kimber had put a lot of time in with us to do this. And I can tell you're looking at table 13, and
Yeah.
that's the key table. So that's the last thing I was going to say was direct you
starts on
there.
like 20.
29 through
29,
38.
yeah.
It's a big table.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I like being able to look at the other cities and what the other cities charge, and it's interesting. You mentioned the fact that most cities don't take into account the direct costs.
The indirect.
The indirect costs, sorry. And I think that some of the bigger cities are more easily, they are more easily able to absorb those costs, and
it's not intentional necessarily that they don't do that, because generally when we're going to do a study and they realize what they are and they're short, they need more revenue, they're like, oh my goodness.
Right. But it's just interesting to see some of the differences and how little some are charging and how much others are charging. And I'm like you said, you mentioned not wanting to maybe do 100% recovery, and I can see where that's probably wise considering what large increases they would be in some areas.
Yeah.
I think we were generally in the 50 to 75, 60% range is what we were kind of looking at. But again, as Kimber and I went through this with Susie, literally on a line-by-line basis, we said, okay, on your category 1 application, what's this going to look like versus your cat 5, you know how we use kind of a hurricane scale with applications. We were looking at this saying, okay, typically we're kind of in the lower range, and so that's where we came up with that percentage. We felt like that was a fair number.
Well, so are these proposed fees as if we were doing 100% recovery?
What we were proposing was in the 60 to,
So the proposed fees are the ones that you would eventually like us to adopt or
the proposed fees are the ones that Kimber, Susie, and I...
Generally, but not always that range. You'll have to look at them. They're one by one. You can see the current fee, you can see the recommended, and then you have to look in the back to see comparative fees. But we went through that when we did it.
It's on the recommended. I want you to understand that Susie was not just taking those recommended fees and saying, here's an abacus, and we said X percentage, and this is what it is. We spent a lot of time going through and debating every single fee, saying, does this make sense? We can charge this on the max. We know what the max is, and I think we would be legally fine to go the 100%. But like, for example, on the down zone, we had that conversation, and we said, the council would be very much in favor, the community would be very much in favor. Therefore, we made those recommendations specific to those things. And so what you're getting as the recommended is truly what we as staff are recommending for you.
Okay.
Based on what we understand, your desires would be for our community, and where we felt it was legitimate, how it compared to other communities, where we wanted to be with that, and so that was the recommendations that we came back with. Was a lot of time on our part to say, we think that this is appropriate, this is fair, not going for the 100% cost recovery by any stretch, but trying to come back with a methodology that we felt was defensible.
Yes. Can I just reiterate what Mark said? There were 3 steps, really. We had that maximum fee there now. We'd calculated it. We looked at it. We looked at where we are now and where the comparative cities were, and then we just discussed it and came up with a combination. It was really a 3-point plan.
And I really appreciate that. And, for those in the audience and those watching at home, there are some, pretty significant increases in some of these areas. And I think, some people would look at that and say like, oh, this is, just a huge increase in fees. But what I'm seeing is how much the residents have been subsidizing development and how much the developers have been benefiting from taking money out of the pockets of the residents. And so I think this is, that we're more accurately reflecting the costs of development on the city and on the residents. I think that's admirable. So
good, fast-growing community.
Exactly.
Well, and to point out though, on the same side is we are going down on some too.
Yes.
I mean, master development agreement is pretty significant down.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying they're all bad, but it's just, and so many of them are staying the same. It's just, I think that, to realize that we're actually charging what it costs to develop it rather than just hoping that we're covering costs, which we haven't been.
Well, and according to our old methodology, we had, like a larger master development fee, but we weren't capturing all of the other component parts to it. So this now breaks it down to the component parts that says, okay, if this goes well, then we shouldn't need the larger fee on that because we've actually captured the other components to make sure that it's good. And some of it's going to have like a rezone request, Well, we wanted to make sure and reflect that the rezone becomes its own kind of line item component to that.
Thank you.
Is there a reason that all of the comparative cities are in Utah County and none of them are in Salt Lake County?
Yeah, to answer that, as Susie had mentioned, a lot of that's competitive, right? And so if you have developers that are looking to develop either here or maybe in Lehigh or Eagle Mountain, we felt it was more appropriate to look at what other communities here in this, neighborhood within Utah County are doing in their fees, rather than looking at, what's Bountiful doing on their fee schedule.
Well, I wasn't
and
thinking
things
so
like
much
that, but-
Bountiful, but for example, Harriman is probably much
Buffalo.
more appropriate than, for example, Springboro, Spanish Fork. So those are just some of the questions I had.
Sure, and
Yeah, those are definitely ones that if you're interested in seeing, we can add those
Harriman,
to the
West
appendix.
Jordan might be kind of interested to look at
That,
and to
that,
see.
they're also in our competitive market, even though they're across the county line.
Yeah, and again, we just picked Utah County as that.
Right.
Bluffdale being a nice buffer, Camp Williams being a nice buffer, but,
But
like-
competitively, they're actually not, because we've got the same developers coming back and forth.
Sure.
But in reality, in that case, Utah Lake is a huge buffer between us and Spanish Fork. You know, if you're gonna go there.
Nobody's gonna build on the lake.
So I will say this, though, I mean, even if we add in Harriman and some of these other communities, similar communities, I really think that our recommendations wouldn't change.
No, I agree with that.
Because we already kind of weighted it for what we felt like our community impacts were relative to the more immediate adjacent communities. And so, I would say we could certainly add those in. I don't know that it would substantially change our recommendations, because each of these things, we looked at kind of the three-part test of, okay, does this make sense? What are the other communities at? And ultimately, because of our uniqueness, where should we be?
Well, and I get that. I think that just as council and as residents of the area, we will hear sometimes from different individuals, our fees were really high as compared to
X.
Lehigh, as compared to Eagle Mountain, as compared to Harriman or whatever, or they were low compared to those. But we never hear comparisons to Spanish Fork. We never hear comparisons to Springville, because they're too far away geographically. So just comments.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
No, I appreciate this, and I'm supportive of the recommendation that you had between whatever the exact percentage is, 60 to 70%, because with, this is a management accounting exercise, and sometimes there's the argument, and maybe the company that I work for, which you may be aware of, that when a full-time staff takes a training, for instance, we just wasted $500,000 across the organization. Well, in reality, it is full-time staff that it's not like Kevin would be out suing someone to get money for the city. It's not lost revenue. Maybe that's happening. I don't know that I'm unaware of, but the point I'm making is I'm supportive of the 60 to 70% because there's a lot of fudge work,
Yes.
management and accounting and hours and that type of thing. And sometimes Kevin's spending on time, or Mark or Sarah or whoever's spending on time on one thing versus another isn't necessarily taking away from revenue generation, if that makes sense. Sunk costs.
So I think direction from the council, let us look over it, come in, ask questions.
please
Have this
come in.
back.
Come in and ask questions, and then specifically, if you want to deviate from what we're recommending, we'll bring back a fee ordinance that is going to stick to that recommended fee as published here, unless you direct us otherwise at our next meeting. Because there are a lot of numbers in there, and so if you're going to deviate from something, please be very specific with us, or come ready to recommend where it is you would like to do that. Most likely, if you have concerns, come talk to us, though, because there's probably a reason why we chose what we did.
So I guess for the council's sake, are we looking at the first meeting in October, second meeting in October?
I'm fine with whatever.
Fine with the first as well.
No.
No, yeah, I'm fine. I think 2 weeks is
Okay.
adequate time to.
Are
2 weeks?
is Science Public Finance coming back?
I don't think If we need them between now and then, we'll use that. If you want them to update, adding Harriman, what was the other comparative cities you wanted us to? West Jordan? Harriman and West Jordan and South Jordan. So if you can add those 3 in, and then we'll send you an updated
You can get rid of
Appendix C.
Springville and Spanish Fork so that you have room on your table.
I think they also consider.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, to her point, Harriman, I think, also is that growing city.
South
You know,
Jordan, they're similar.
They're seeing the same kind of growth, whereas you may not see that in Provo and Orem.
Sure.
Springville and Spanish.
And so I would say, just please, if you can reach out to us, you know, probably by maybe Tuesday of next week, so that any changes we need to make, we can fully incorporate those. Then they can get us a fresh PDF by the end of next week and get it into your next packet. That would be great.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
Susie and Scott, thank you.
Okay, Sarah, we've got yours. Which one do you want to go with? Your public hearing, item 2 or item 8?
Let's go back to the code amendments.
Okay.
Yeah, the public hearing for the code. So, that's what I. Okay, I didn't change anything in the definitions, and then in 1905, for cell towers. So we discussed the poles that might need to be replaced in the right-of-way, and so I just added clarification in the event the pole needs to be replaced. The light fixtures on replacement poles should be placed at the original height.
And do we need to add in their language whereby it still matches our standards as far as the type of pole? So they don't come in with like a...
We can add it, but it's, I mean, it's one of those things that just because they replace the pole doesn't mean they get to use a different standard. So it's already
Okay.
another part of
That's
the code.
as long as that it meets that. I just don't want them to come in and say, well, it's actually a cell phone tower and you're just putting your light on it. And so they come in with a different type of pole. Does that make sense?
I can add it for clarification.
I don't know. If we don't need to, don't.
But it's already another, yeah, it's already in, you know, the lighting section and
Okay.
the engineering standards for light poles.
Good enough.
I think it's always good to have it there.
Mr.
I'm
Lawyer
not sure
thinks
you're
we
gonna
should.
I'm not sure you're going to find a standard. I don't think it's a bad idea to have it, but
Okay.
at some
I will
point,
add
at some
it.
point you get say too much and it's too verbose. But it's on the other hand, it's good when developers come in and you can point to a specific standard there. It's helpful. Yeah, you don't want it too
Okay.
lawyerly.
And shall meet all other city standards. We're good. we're fine. All these standards they're reading should be current. Okay. And then on camouflaging, we talked about who is the approval authority. So just this section, if there's surrounding buildings, trees, or other large objects, they need to camouflage. And so I added camouflage design shall be reviewed by the Development Review Committee for compatibility with surrounding structures, and final approval granted by the Land Use Authority based on the following criteria, because I know we need criteria. And the criteria is the design shall include elements from nearby surroundings and shall blend in.
So would that allow then for, even though they're not necessarily large buildings, if a development wanted to come in and say one on the north end of town that wants to put an obelisk in and they want to turn that into a camouflage cell tower, does that allow for that? Because there really aren't big buildings there, but yet they still have the ability to make that a camouflage tower.
They can do it. So this is saying, this is making it a requirement where there's surrounding objects or things like that, but it's not addressing situations where there aren't any.
So they can still...
So it's not saying they can't if there aren't surrounding objects.
Okay.
It's just not a requirement if there aren't surrounding objects or structures.
Fine.
Okay.
Suggesting all that.
So I left this, let me know if you're okay with that. The monopole shall be located within 120 feet of the power line corridor. That's for ones that are adjacent to the power line corridor, that they shall be located within 120 feet of the corridor. I can change within to no farther than 120 feet. Okay. For this one, the distance was discussed, from residential property. I changed that to 150 feet. Earlier drafts had it at 120. The Planning Commission recommended 200 feet, so I changed it to 150 feet.
I was okay with the same time with the 200. But that's
I can leave it at 200.
200 going
very good.
once. Ryan,
I'm good with the 200.
okay.
If that's the case, then
Yes.
Well, if you're felling trees and it breaks in the middle, it could fall.
Okay, so
100 feet from the center base.
I will put this back to 200. Okay, I had to strike that, so it'll all come out. Anyway, what was that? Okay, back to 200, striking adequate fall zone. I left this spacing at 1,000 feet. Sorry, I'm trying to go back up to it.
monopoles.
For monopoles, and then my mouse is having issues. Where'd that battery go? Oh, okay. I struck asphalt shingles so that the building shall have asphalt shingles, just struck that. So those are all the changes I made to cell phone towers. Okay.
Yep.
And then I'll go to the public utility stuff. Okay, so there was a question on who should approve the chain link and in what situation. This is a criteria I'm suggesting. We can add more or strike this or things like that. So vinyl coated chain link is allowed for facilities more than 200 feet from existing residential, subject to approval by the land use authority based on the following criteria. The site has less than 100 feet of street frontage. So sites with less than 100 feet of street frontage could have chain link. We could change that to a different number. We don't have to use that criteria. It was just, there wasn't any criteria suggested, so that's what I came up with.
And again, it depends on where it is. Yeah. If it's next to a house, then that shouldn't be, and on top of that, 100 feet of frontage is easy to put a nice fence up for 100 feet versus the entire facility. So
we could change it so that the street frontage can't have chain link.
I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
On security, but I'm also okay with having the street frontage being a nicer fence.
For the city site, we weren't necessarily basing it on security because we can achieve security with the more expensive fence. We were considering fiscal costs to taxpayers.
I mean, I think we're the land use authority.
Is it us or is it DRC?
Well, it depends on who the approval authority is for the conditional use permit.
You want to delegate it to me?
Yeah, right.
So in...
We'll let Kevin have it, and he'll bore him into submission.
Hey, that's not fair.
So mean.
Aren't the majority of conditional use permits
for new
decisions?
sites? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Are they not council decisions?
For new
I looked
sites.
at the land review chart for new sites.
Mm-hmm. For new sites. For existing sites, they're not.
I guess I would just say that's a recall. If we're approving it anyway, we can make that decision.
as the applicant and the completely biased individual, please nix one.
So if I take that out, Kevin, is this language fine, subject to approval by the land use authority? Chain link fence can be used.
I thought the cell tower thing was tough with the FCC that wouldn't let me be. It was just like, this is tough. This is harder. Fencing.
Or do we have to have a criteria? Okay. So think of some suggestions
Why don't
for
we just
criteria. For criteria.
Side against the safety and aesthetics and things
Well-
like that.
That was my original.
Based on security and cost.
Well, didn't we also need to change it from existing residential development to
Residential.
a residential unit or something like that? Because all of
Want
Mount
me to say
Saratoga is a
dwelling?
residential development. Dwelling.
I would say property line of an
The property line, the property line, the property line of a residential dwelling?
No. Don't do property line. That's the dwelling.
Okay.
But he's not residentially zoned, he is agriculturally zoned. Okay.
Well, be specific, but say residential dwelling.
In a residential zone? So,
Okay.
so an existing dwelling unit in a residential zone. Wow, was that lawyerly enough? Do I graduate?
You put Wilden to sleep, you qualify. You pass the bar.
Dang.
It'll give you a piece of paper.
Okay. More than 200 feet from an existing residential dwelling in a residential zone, subject to approval by the land use authority. And if we have to have criteria, I was trying to think of other criteria that would be applicable.
Just say security and aesthetics.
Okay.
That's so
But
fluky.
aesthetics, that's counterintuitive because chain link would be more aesthetic.
Yeah, I know another developer that came in thought their tires were beautiful too, so we all know you're crazy.
You could say safety, cost, durability. Chain link is going to last longer. Replacement costs,
Okay.
just
Ongoing maintenance.
ongoing maintenance.
We put cost-related conditions in the code.
Well, you're talking about
Okay, chain link will improve the security of the site. Criteria number 1.
Fiscal sustainability? See?
Chain link improve
Sustainability.
the
durability.
sustainability.
Yeah, durability compared to a block or a concrete wall.
Well, but compared to the wrought iron's
Chain link's giving us 2 months when the kids break through it. Just saying.
Sorry, let's,
Does chain
Okay.
link ever improve the security of the run?
No.
Okay.
You don't get small little dogs.
As long as we can make a case for it, then fine.
They could do that.
Well, I can go over barbed wire.
I don't know
Whole
about that
blanket
sentence, that
covers
second
barbed wire
sentence.
really well.
I dig tunnels
I
Um,
mean,
with spoons.
well, we don't want to put anything related to cost in here. I don't know what that means.
I think it is.
because the lawyer told him to. Hi, Kevin.
If you don't want to put aesthetics on there,
I'll swallow it.
Health, safety, welfare.
There you go, health, safety, welfare.
Okay.
Just, why don't you just say it's allowed? Just make it allowed. If it's not within that 200-foot
Okay,
buffer, just
that's fine.
allow it.
Let's do that. Let's just say that it's allowed.
What?
If it's within that.
If it's more than 200 feet from an existing residential dwelling in a residential zone. Chain link. So just, hold on a second. Hold on.
People talking.
Yeah, let's focus on this for just a second. So if we have chain link is allowed for facilities more than 200 feet from an existing residential dwelling in a residential zone.
Period.
Well, we don't want to limit it to residential zones because that could be interpreted different ways. So we're trying to say the existing residential dwelling.
It would be, chain link is,
This is talking about
So-
what residential homes that we're doing.
What?
Talking about how close the house.
It could be closer to 100 feet.
Yeah, just say an existing residential dwelling that is in a residential zone.
Okay.
And remember, the only other zone, I mean, there's other zones we're talking about, but there'd be less of an impact. And in fact, chain link is allowed in an ag zone. So, just to consider.
Are
I
we
think
okay
that,
with
I think
this?
that is a good clarification to have in a that is in a residential
So
zone.
if you delete verse 3 and 4, and I think, are we there?
Well, then I would strike out subject to approval by land use authority and just have vinyl coated chain link is allowed for facilities more than 200 feet from an existing residential dwelling that is in a residential zone.
Based on the following criteria.
And no, we were talking about not having that. We're talking about not having that.
why do you
We're
have,
talking about not having that.
Did we want to push it back away from, like, give it a setback so it's not right up against back of a sidewalk in other areas?
So setback or 4 foot?
Or 10-foot, I don't know. I just don't think that,
Just be careful you don't push it too much without us having a map of, right?
right.
Because I think some of that we can certainly with, but it can go too far back.
So, I'm thinking of other areas too, like, for example, because our whole goal here, for example, would be, let's talk about the corner of Pony and 800. If we're to allow for this, we don't want that chain link. If you push it back a little bit away from the sidewalk, then it's a lot less visible. If you have it right at back of sidewalk, it becomes very, very visible and actually can interfere with passage of pedestrians and bicyclists and whatever else. I don't know.
No, I think.
There's not.
There's a trail.
So back
Okay.
of right of way, because sidewalk's always going to be on the inside of that right of way. Not always. I can show you.
Okay. We are now splitting hairs. The vet called, getting abusive of the dead horse.
Well, no, we can do that. We can say, you know, the chain link fence shall be 15 feet from the right of way or something like that, or.
since
Is
these
this-
are
but is that
public
just in-
buildings, put may, not shall.
Or, well, is it appropriate in this location at all? Because we're also talking about the residential, how close we are to the residential dwelling use. Is this supposed to go someplace else? Sorry.
So we can, yeah. And then we can
I mean, is
put
it
a
just-
distance from the right of way. So shall be set back 10 feet or 15 feet or 5 feet from the right of way.
How far is the setback usually? What's our standard setback?
It's different in every zone. So the one that we're looking at for Pond 8, it's 25 feet. But that's such a narrow entrance that if we push it that far back, I think we're pushing it too far.
Park strip's 8 foot.
Well, park strips on, all within the right of way.
I drafted it with 5 feet. Such chain link fence shall be, I don't need to say such. So chain link fence shall be set back 5 feet from the right of way.
Bingo.
How does that affect maintenance?
I think we can look at this for now. I don't have the 800 test site plan here, but I don't think it'd impact that.
Perfect.
With that to start and see how it goes.
All this, Kayla?
In that, I'll just bring this up really quick because one thing we want to consider is the clear sight triangle. However, chain link fence is, you can see through it. So I don't know if it.
Yes, however, weeds collect in it, and weeds grow up it, and then it causes issues. So I know we have to keep the weeds down, but not always does that happen, not just in our areas. But remember, this isn't just for us, this is for all utilities. So if Questar has something come in, if Rocky Mountain Power has something come in.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's already in there.
Okay.
Good catch. Thank you.
Yeah. Should we specify though whether or not, because you can
it says
see
fencing
through.
period, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, so next topic. Under landscaping, I added this. We were talking about distinguishing between buildings that need to be occupied and buildings that aren't going to be occupied. So what I added is all structures intended for occupancy shall meet the landscaping requirements in 1906. All other structures shall meet the requirements below.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Best code of
Okay.
Speaking on behalf of Kevin again.
And that was it. Those are all the.
Did you know he was your mouthpiece?
Oh, you guys would be happy with me tonight.
We are.
That's why I'm
And we
speaking
can't
on behalf
tease you.
of
You're picking on me.
They're picking on Kevin.
That was it.
Okay.
So,
Then I will entertain a motion.
I move that we approve
Did you hit
code
control
amendments to
F?
Title 19, multiple sections, cell towers, public buildings, public utility sites, ordinance 17-27 dated today with the changes discussed and shown on the screen.
Okay. I have a first from Councilman Porter.
Second.
I have a second from
So you
Councilman
don't leave
Wilden.
anything out there.
Any further discussion on the motion?
In all seriousness, you have saved these changes, right? No, I just asked for about 2 minutes ago. I said save that. I have lost hours of work for not hitting Control S before.
Oh, Councilman Podeska,
Aye.
Wilden,
Aye.
Barch,
Aye.
Porter.
Aye.
I almost called you McComber. Mine went blank.
Councilwoman Call.
huh?
We only pick on those we like. Okay, item 2. We're back to 2. Pond 8. Okay, I have a motion being asked for from the council.
I'm okay with, all right, I move that we approve Pond 8 secondary reservoir site plan conditional use permit. With
11:20.
that address listed on the agenda.
Okay, I have a first from Councilman Wilden.
I'll second.
I have a second from Councilman Podeska. Any further discussion on the motion?
I just have one question. The site plan, when I remember looking at it, what type of fencing is shown on the site plan?
It
Is
says whatever is by approval.
Okay. So,
We had it in there, and
because when I first looked at it, it was the wrought iron. And Are we
It's chain
chain
iron.
iron?
Chiron.
Okay.
whatever you gave us permission to use is what we're going for.
Okay, so the changes allowed you to do.
You just gave us direction on bidding chain, vinyl coated chain link
Okay.
for this
Then
area.
I'm good.
Are there conditions on that one? I'm not sure that they got included in the motion.
Yes, so you
We'll amend that
You'll need
after the
to-
discussion.
Okay.
include the findings and conditions as well in your
Okay,
motion.
so I had two quick questions. First of all, where the heck does the overflow go? Because it shows an overflow on the north side, and yet it doesn't go anywhere. So are we just going to
We're
flood
actually-
irrigate the neighbors?
No, we're building a storm drain connection as part of this, and it will discharge into the
Straight
storm
into
drain.
storm drain?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other question is, and.
Gordon, correct me, am I right on that?
Okay. Yeah, I saw the double inlet. So it's going down the drive into that double inlet. Okay, perfect. And then my other question is, and this is kind of, we'll go back to this code and we can address it later or whatever, but one of the things that we didn't talk about was what happens when, right now, there's not really water in this area, so we're not gonna be landscaping. But eventually, this road will have an actual park strip and an actual water line up it, and we can actually come back in and put some trees in the park strip.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, we're behind another property, so our frontage is really only the rounded portion of that area. So yes, we can come back and address that at some
Eventually.
point in the future. And, you know, we'll just have to kind of include that out there as to, it's pretty Spartan.
Okay.
Well, I can just see that in the future, this road, because right now that cul-de-sac, I'm not sure that cul-de-sac is going to actually be a cul-de-sac in the end. It may continue forward. So if in the future it comes forward, then we're going to end up with frontage all along that fence line. We're going to have a park strip. So if we can just include a condition that in the future, if water is available and we have the ability to put a park strip with trees in, we do that or something to that effect.
Yes. Okay, I have an amended first.
Second.
An amended second. Any further discussion on the motion?
So we could put one.
So we could.
A 22-foot wide driveway. Okay. Back to the motion on the table. Councilman Podeska?
Second.
No.
No.
Aye.
He wants your vote.
Aye.
Wilden?
Aye.
Barch?
Aye.
Porter?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. On to item 8, the Heron Hills Park Plan.
Okay, that's me too. You've seen this before, so they need this approved in order to move on with this phase. You saw it at a work session a few months ago, and sorry, I'm getting to it. Yeah, we're having, okay, here we go. So Heron Hills is in the south part of the city. Here's the site. The park is located near the lake. So here's the plat with the park shown in the corner. And then here's the concept design that you saw previously. You provided feedback, and then they made changes and took it to the Parks Committee and made additional changes, and then this is the final plan that you're seeing. It allows for vehicles pulling trailers to have parking, some pull-through parking, a playground, a pavilion and a restroom, and then a ramp to the lake for non-motorized craft, and then volleyball and sand area. And then between the volleyball and the lake, there's actually wetlands.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, so we're approving a concept plan?
This would be the
This is the final
design
park
for the
plan.
park.
Okay, I just wanted to.
We looked at
So it's This is the park design. This what you're approving, so.
I mean, the other question is, we approve this, is there like a timeline that we're committing the city to
There's
put
not.
Well, part of this also is part of his amenities, he's actually putting some of it in.
Yeah.
And so we have to have the plan designed.
As much as his money.
No, and I understand that. It's just there's part of the staff report that says the city will put these things in, and I just don't want to commit to do that in the next year or two, because we have some very necessary massive ticket items that are coming down, and as a city, I just don't want. I have no idea what these additional things would cost, and maybe it's in the packet and I missed it, but it could be an awful lot, and I just don't want to commit in the near term to pump out.
So, Commissioner Wilden and I discussed this, and we've actually, Commissioner Wilden?
Wilkins?
Oops. Councilmember Wilden.
Oh,
Sorry.
Sorry.
We talked briefly this morning about this, and one thing that we are going to be doing is kind of consolidating all of our capital plans. We've got our capital projects in our budget document, but we're going to do a better job of trying to pull that out so that we can actually kind of show all the capital prioritizations, and I thought this was an excellent suggestion on Steve's part for us to kind of pull that out and really try and make a very clear, concise discussion of all of the capital projects across all of the different funds, and do it in such a way that it very clearly, focuses in on, for the next several years what kind of commitments we've got. So please expect that we'll bring that back to you at about the time of the retreat, and we think that that's a legitimate, item that we can improve in our budgeting process. And so, adding this to that list, if there's no specific requirement, we can certainly prioritize this along with the other park projects.
But to his
and other
point, we're
things.
not committing ourselves to a timeline of when this will be done right now.
Or no, that hasn't been discussed.
But I think his concern also, though, is in number 5, it says items not improved by the applicant will be improved by the city at a later date, and it's got some very specific things lined out. But we have found that in times past, sometimes desires and needs change, and then we end up changing the park plan. So we're going to paint ourselves into a corner.
I would just prefer to put May.
Great. Yeah, go ahead and add that to the motion.
Or
if
subject
that's what you'd
to
like
future
do.
council appropriation.
There you go. Do
yeah.
that.
And just for the, I mean, I think I already explained this for the rest of the council, the mayor's benefit is, I'm just looking at it and we're paying for an awful lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The economy's still strong, but, there's all those forecasts. I just don't want to overextend ourselves and stuff. So I think we're
that's wise.
okay and we're conservative now. It's just like
So the only
sorry.
other thing, that
Mark.
background, Councilman Mark.
Just throwing around titles, aren't we?
So technically, number 5, though, it's not actually within our conditions, it's not technically within our findings. So do we need to say that, or is that,
if it's not in the findings and conditions,
It's not in the findings and
I
conditions.
don't think so. I'm just.
it's just part of the background?
Okay.
The notes on the plan say future pavilion and restroom to be installed by the city or constructed by the city. So that would be.
Can you just add little onto that note and just say for future council appropriation?
Okay.
Put that in your motion. Smoke it.
Okay, so I move that we approve the Heron Hills Park Plan, Steve Larson applicant at 3250 South Redwood Road, and direct staff to add to the final park plan the item, a note stating that these improvements will be done per future council appropriations, or subject to future council appropriations.
Councilwoman Barch.
Second.
Second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion on the motion? Councilman Wilden.
Aye.
Barch.
Aye.
Pedeska. Porter.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, approval of minutes. I have some changes. I didn't get to read these till later this afternoon. On line 152, it's written reduction for a reduction. It was meant to be a proposal for a reduction. And the time start for the work session is 7:20, and it should have been 7 p.m. because we started policy session at 7:20. Okay.
Do you want me?
Yep. You're ready.
I'll move that we approve the September 5th, 2017 minutes with those submitted and those discussed by Mayor Miller.
Second?
We have a first from Councilman Wilden, a second from Councilman Podeska. Any further discussion? Okay. Councilman Porter? Barge?
Oh, wait, aye.
I'm gonna be last.
Wilden?
Aye.
Podeska?
Aye.
Barge?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. That was tough. It was a nail biter. Okay, we have need to enter
It
into a
would've, but
closed
I would've gone
session.
back and tried to make a change.
Do I have a motion?
So made.
I have a first from Councilwoman Barch.
Second.
Second from Councilman Porter. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Now Chris Carn knows what.